241. At the boundary where ice met fire, the air tore apart in visible ripples of distortion. White steam rose like a mushroom cloud, instantly obscuring the whole arena. The stands fell silent. Everyone held their breath, eyes fixed on the billowing mist. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The white cloud blew away on the wind. The image cleared. The fiery barrier still stood, a golden red ring of flame that hadn't wavered. Tongues of fire still lapped its surface, its light brighter than before. On the other side of the barrier, the massive form of the frost-winged dragon hung in midair, icy vertical pupils narrowing in confusion. Its frost breath had been blocked. Inside the ring of flame, Harry, Cedric, and Davies had fallen to the ground along with their brooms, rolling into a heap. The three champions lay sprawled on the grass, gasping for air, faces pale and bodies slick with cold sweat. Harry's glasses sat crooked on his face as he struggled to lift his head. He squinted at the still-burning barrier, and then at the figure standing in its center, his back to them. Lynn stood motionless, his wand in hand. Lit by the flames behind him, his silhouette seemed unnaturally calm. Harry opened his mouth, but no words came out. Cedric pushed himself up and stared at the fiery ring, then at Lynn's back, disbelief written across his face. What kind of magic is this? Lynn didn't turn around. He only tilted his head slightly, catching a glimpse of the three disheveled champions behind him. "Stop talking and run," he said. "You're getting in the way of my performance." The three exchanged looks. They scrambled to their feet, snatched up their fallen brooms, and mounted them without a word. Whoosh! The brooms shot into the air. The three figures were gone like arrows from a bow, streaking toward the far end of the valley in the blink of an eye. The frost-winged dragon roared, a sound that made the ground vibrate. Its vertical pupils fixed on the fleeing champions. Rage shimmered through the frost mist as it unfurled its massive wings and took to the air. "Since you're here, there's no need to be in such a hurry to leave." A lazy voice floated up from the valley floor. The frost-winged dragon paused in mid-flight and lowered its head toward the tiny figure below. Lynn flicked his wrist. The golden-red barrier erupted skyward. Under his control, the flames condensed into a behemoth the size of the frost-winged dragon, a dragon made entirely of fire. Its scales were molten, each one a dancing ember. Its wings stretched wide, trailing tails of flame that seared the air with every beat. A roar thundered from the fire dragon's mouth. The two dragons collided in midair. Boom! The impact sent a violent shockwave rippling outward. Stones dislodged from the valley walls and rattled down. Trees snapped and fell under the blow. The frost-winged dragon, caught off guard, was thrown about, its great body rolling before it regained control. In all its years, it had never faced anything like this. A living dragon of fire. What was this? It answered with a blast of icy blue breath, aimed straight at the fire dragon. The fire dragon didn't dodge. It charged through the frost. Ice and flame met with a crackling hiss. White steam spewed up, shrouding most of the sky, but the silhouette of the fire dragon did not falter. It burst through the vapor and snapped its jaws savagely at the frost-winged dragon's neck. The frost-winged dragon twisted to avoid the bite and slammed a foreclaw into the fire dragon's flank. Sparks showered down as the flaming dragon's body rocked from the blow. It would have fallen if it were not stubbornly, tightly latched on. The fire dragon bit down, flames beginning to sear through the icy scales upon contact. Steam hissed as frost and fire neutralized each other. The sound was a high, ear-piercing sizzle. The frost-winged dragon shrieked in pain, rearing its head and ramming its massive horned skull into the fire dragon's. Heads collided with a thunderous crash, and another shockwave rolled through the valley. The flames on the fire dragon dimmed for a moment, but it clung on and pressed harder. The frost-winged dragon thrashed its wings, swept its tail, every movement full of world-shaking force, but the fire dragon hung on like plaster, impossible to dislodge. "Oh!" Ludo Bagman's voice exploded from the commentary box, breathless with excitement. Lynn's condensed a giant fire dragon from the flames. That dragon is locked in combat with the Nordic Frostwing dragon. The Frostwing has unleashed its breath. My God, that cold could freeze steel. And the fire dragon charged right through it. It's latched onto the Frostwing's neck. They're colliding. He gestured wildly as he spoke, words tumbling over each other. The Frostwing is swatting at it with its claws. The force could shatter rock. Sparks are flying everywhere from the impact, but the fire dragon won't let go. It's all raw power. Ice versus fire, the ultimate showdown. People in the stands were on their feet. No one wanted to sit. Every strike between the two dragons drew gasps. The younger students clenched their fists, faces flushed with excitement and the foolish wish to jump in and help, though none of them knew whose side to be on. "The fire dragon's been thrown off," Ludo's voice spiked. On the big screen, the Frostwing dragon gave one final wrench, flicking the fire dragon free. The flaming behemoth tumbled through the air several times, then stabilized. It was noticeably dimmer. The battle had taken a toll, but its blazing white eyes remained locked on the Frostwing. The Frostwing hovered, gasping. Its scales were scorched, spots along its neck blackened and smoking. The fire had nearly burned through its armor. It stared at the fire dragon, then down at the tiny human on the valley floor. Lynn still stood there, wand in hand, utterly calm as if the furious skyfight were of no consequence. The Frostwing dragon hesitated. Should it press the attack? It could, but even victory would not leave it unscathed. That construct of fire had hurt it badly. Healing would take days. Retreat and live to guard the remaining eggs. That was the practical choice. And the 3 egg thieves were already long gone. "That's enough," Lynn finally spoke up. He tilted his head and looked toward the scarred dragon. "You've fought long enough. You've let out what you needed to let out. Those 3 are gone. You won't catch them." The dragon listened. Lynn continued, blunt and practical. "Look at those wounds. It'll take 10 days, maybe half a month to heal properly. Instead of wasting time here, go back and protect the remaining eggs. If they get taken again, you'll have nowhere to go to complain about it." Silence stretched. Those words, plain, pragmatic, somehow made sense. Lynn shrugged and gave his wand a gentle flick. The giant fire dragon hanging in the sky shattered into sparks and dissipated. "All right, go back," he said. "Keep a better watch next time." The Frostwing dragon regarded him for a long moment, then gave a low, rumbling roar. It turned and flew away without looking back. Lynn watched until the dragon disappeared into the distance. Then he lowered his gaze and examined his wand, lifted his hand, and casually waved in a certain direction. The cameras caught his face clearly on the big screen. For a few seconds, the Quidditch pitch was dead silent. Then the stadium erupted. Cheers and applause burst forth like a volcanic explosion, making the stands tremble. "Lynn, champion of Azkaban! Too strong! He drove the dragon away!" Ludo Bagman, nearly hoarse with excitement, was shouting himself hoarse from the commentary box. "Lynn has repelled the Nordic Frostwing dragon. With the fire dragon he condensed, he charged head-on and drove this terrifying creature away from the icy depths. The Hogwarts champions are safe. Lynn has achieved the most astonishing feat of this match." His voice cracked, but he didn't care. The Hufflepuff section had gone wild. Edgar stood at the front, flag raised, shouting himself raw. "Lynn! Lynn! Lynn!" William and Ollie were less frantic, but every line of their faces shone with pride, the pride of brothers watching one of their own perform. Students from other houses joined the cheering. On the judges' panel, the reactions were a study in contrast. Madame Maxime lifted an eyebrow, a small smile on her lips. Pickery leaned back, watching with interest. Principal Okoye nodded thoughtfully. Karkaroff's face went dark, his expression grim and tight-lipped. Dumbledore set his teacup down, stroked his beard, and smiled with an approving gleam. "Young people are truly full of boundless vitality," he mused. "Far better than the gloom of old ashes. Progress, indeed." Several of the nearby judges turned to look at him in puzzlement, not quite sure what he meant. Chapter 242. What do you want? A bicycle. Deep in the Forbidden Forest, Master Lynn, who had spent the day traveling and fighting 2 battles, looked up at the sky. Twilight was thickening, darkness seeped in from all sides, slowly swallowing the last light in the trees. The distant canopy blurred into a soft gray blue. Birdsong faded, replaced by the rustle of nocturnal creatures. Lynn took stock of his situation. Water, he'd heard a stream nearby when he passed earlier. Food, the wild duck in his hand. It was cold now, and cleaned, the kind of emergency rations you keep in your pack. He had caught it drinking by the stream. It hadn't been quick enough to get away. Fuel, the forest provided plenty of firewood. He smiled to himself. The conditions were acceptable. He set to work building a shelter. Magic made the job easy. With a flick of his wand, several small trees uprooted themselves, their branches stripped and turned into supports. He turned over and compacted the earth into a flat floor. Large leaves and vines were woven together and draped over the frame to make a crude but serviceable roof. The whole thing took less than 5 minutes. As the last rays sank in the west and daylight gave way to night, Lynn's temporary camp had taken shape. Wand in hand, he walked a slow circle around it, murmuring the necessary incantations. Salvio Hexia. Shield charm. Muggle-repelling charm. There shouldn't be any muggles here, but it's habit. Caterwauling charm. 50-meter radius. Automatic alarm. Light spurted from the tip of his wand, sinking into the earth and the surrounding trees. Satisfied, he sat on a stone by the fire. The flames were already bright. He tossed on a handful of wood. Sparks popped and crackled as the fire caught. He propped the duck above the coals. Its skin began to sizzle, and a drop of golden grease hit the embers, sending a tiny flare and a delicious scent into the air. His stomach growled. He watched the bird caramelize to a glossy, inviting brown. He tore off a leg. Steam rose and juices ran down his fingers. He blew on it and bit in. He chewed, frowning slightly. A bit plain without seasoning, he muttered, but it'll do. Indeed it would. A wild duck in the forbidden forest was better than nothing. In short order, he devoured the roast, gnawing even the bones clear. He tossed the clean skeleton into the fire. It cracked, and the grease burned with a faint blue smoke. He wiped his hands and yawned. Sleep came easily after a full meal. Inside the shelter, he had made a crude bed by transfiguration, a wooden frame piled with a thick layer of hay and leaves he'd collected that day. It wasn't the dormitory mattress, but it was comfortable by wilderness standards. He lay down, hands behind his head, staring at the leafy ceiling while he listened to the wind and the insects. Tonight, this was his bed. He closed his eyes and soon his breathing evened out. The campfire popped quietly. Distant animal calls rose and fell, but none ventured close. Lynn slept soundly. At the same time, on the giant screens around the Quidditch pitch, footage switched between the champions' camps. Ludo Bagman's voice boomed with the theatrical relish of someone who loved a spectacle. Night has fallen, and our champions are spending their first night in the Forbidden Forest. Let's see how they're doing. Ilvermorny appeared first. Ryan, Thomas, and Jordan had put up a decent tent. Thomas used his wand to heat a pot. Jordan yawned nearby. Ryan held his wand and tried to provide light with Lumos. Though the glow at his wand tip flickered, he'd clearly used a lot of energy that day. The Ilvermorny champions have set up a tent, Ludo crowed. They're preparing dinner. Next, Ouagadou. Amina perched on a thick branch, leaning against the trunk with her eyes closed. Nima and Wanjiru alternated keeping watch below. One dozed upright against the bark while the other scanned the shadows. Their campfire burned bright. They held a professional division of labor. The Ouagadou champions seem very experienced, Ludo observed approvingly. They've taken a high point and organized a watch. They clearly know their way around wilderness survival. Castellabruxo showed up next. Daniel, Louis, and Nicolas huddled in a small cave whose entrance had been mostly blocked by a rock, leaving only a slit of air. They chatted rapidly in Portuguese, looking pleased. A bottle of wine sat between them. Ludo's voice wavered. The Castellabruxo champions appear to be doing very nicely. Where did that bottle of wine come from? I could have sworn I searched them. At Hogwarts, Cedric, Harry, and Davies sat under a large tree. They hadn't lit a fire for fear of attracting trouble. Brooms in hand, they took turns keeping watch. Davies stared into the darkness, occasionally yawning. Cedric and Harry had dozed off against each other, but neither slept deeply. Harry shifted and frowned now and then. The Hogwarts champions have opted for stealth, Ludo explained. No fire, no camp, minimize the risk of being discovered. Hard, but probably the safest plan. Beauxbaton's segment came next, and the stadium went quiet. On the screen, Fleur sat under a tree, exhausted, her hair rumpled and robes streaked with mud and grass. Her silk scarf was gone. Sophie lay next to her, eyes closed and brow furrowed. Chloe curled up between them, face buried in her knees, shoulders shaking with sobs. Fleur patted her back and murmured in French, but it didn't help much. Sophie glanced at Chloe and, drained, closed her eyes again. Their campfire flickered dimly. Strange animal cries echoed around them. Uh, Ludo sounded uncomfortable. The Beauxbatons champions, things haven't gone well for them today. Chloe was bitten by red venom ants. They traveled all afternoon, and they had to collect task tokens without finding a proper place to stay. I hope they make it through the night. Faces in the stands showed pity. The feed switched one last time to Durmstrang. Crumb stood in a small clearing, eyes sweeping the trees. Lewis followed, his wand probing the foliage. Katya stood tense, wand clenched. The Durmstrang champions don't seem to have found a place to camp yet, Ludo said. But with Crumb suddenly lifted a hand. Lewis and Katya froze, and all three turned their gazes in the same direction. Katya mouthed something. Crumb stared for several seconds, then led them forward cautiously, step by careful step. After a short walk, he stopped again, looking past a large tree. Louis leaned in, following his line of sight. Eh? Louis made a small sound. The camera zoomed. Through the sparse trunks, a warm flicker glowed in the distance, an orange-red campfire burning bright in the dark. Crumb watched it, then signaled, and the three veered toward the light. The Durmstrang champions seemed to have discovered something. They're heading in that direction, Ludo announced, curious. On the big screen, Crumb's trio drew nearer. The campfire grew larger. A simple shelter became visible. In front of it lay a wooden bed. On the bed, a person had his hands behind his head, sleeping soundly. The camera tightened on the face. The stadium fell into stunned silence. That is, Ludo started, voice catching. On the screen, Lynn rolled over, smacked his lips, and went right back to sleep. Chapter 2R43, sometimes hand-to-hand combat is more satisfying than spells. On the big screen, the three Durmstrang champions came to a halt less than 100 meters from Lynn's camp. The night was thick as ink. Only the light from a distant bonfire flickered, barely making out the outline of Lynn's rough shelter. The three of them melted into the tree shadows, peering cautiously toward the fire. No one sat by the flames. On the wooden pallet at the shelter's entrance, a figure lay, hands folded behind his head, sleeping soundly. Crumb narrowed his eyes, trying to make out the face. Lewis craned his neck beside him. Katya stood behind them. The moment his gaze landed on that silhouette, he froze as if struck. That face, that profile, even if it were reduced to ashes, he would have recognized it. It was Lynn. Katya's breath caught. He instinctively took a half step back and snapped a dry twig underfoot with a crisp crack. Crumb glanced over, questioning but mostly warning him to keep quiet. Katya swallowed hard and forced himself to calm down. He looked back at Crumb's shoulders. Crumb, Durmstrang's star, was already signaling for them to take another route and leave. Katya took a steadying breath, darted forward a few steps, and blocked Crumb's path. Crumb stopped and asked, low and confused, "What's wrong?" Lewis shot them an inquiring look as well. Katya nodded and whispered, "There's only one person inside." "So," Crumb replied, still puzzled. "One person can mean one egg," Katya said, voice dropping, excitement threaded through it. "It's just Lynn." Crumb waited, his expression asking him to go on. "He might have an egg on him," Katya continued, barely audible. "Why don't we?" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Crumb's eyebrows twitched. "Rob him." Lewis's eyes widened. He looked from Crumb to Katya and then to the sleeping figure. His mouth opened and closed silently. "Crumb," he hissed under his breath, full of hesitation, "shouldn't we think about this first?" Crumb said nothing at first. He stared toward the shelter, brow furrowing as if weighing Lewis's caution. Katya felt his heart drop. That look, hesitation, wavering, was dangerous. He had to push them over the line. "It's perfect, Crumb," he breathed, even lower, urgency spilling out. "Think about the one egg we have. How many eggs do the other schools have? How many does Hogwarts have? What if Lynn has two?" Crumb's frown deepened. Katya pressed on, voice quickening. "And think about Durmstrang's record. The Triwizard Tournament's been held for so long. How many times have we won? Not once. If we can bring back a championship in this tournament," he painted the picture with every word aimed at the right spot, "it would be history. The headmaster would be proud, and the three of us would be remembered at Durmstrang. Crumb, just imagine it." Crumb's expression changed, slowly sliding into something else. Louis felt a chill. This wasn't mere interest, it was obsession. "Then we'll rob him." Crumb's fist clenched and his voice hardened. "Rob him." "Good." Katya nodded eagerly, a bright grin spreading across his face. Louis stared in discomfort, opening his mouth to protest, but Crumb didn't give him a chance. "I'm a judge in this competition," Crumb said flatly, "and the rules leave everything to my judgment. I've decided. We're taking that egg." Louis sighed, swallowed his words, and wordlessly drew his wand. The three exchanged one more glance, crouched low, and began to creep toward the shelter bathed in the bonfire's light. At the Quidditch pitch, most of the crowd had already grown drowsy. After a whole day of intense battles, wild chases, and Lynn's absurd fishing and firewall dragon fight, adrenaline had waned. The late hour and the quiet images on the screen had lulled many into dozing against their seats. "Look!" Ludo Bagman's shout snapped everyone awake. "The Durmstrang champions are sneaking toward Lynn's shelter." On the large screen, three furtive figures advanced step by careful step under the cover of night. The stands erupted. "What are they doing? Are they going to steal the egg? Bloody hell, they're bold. Don't they know who that is?" Ludo's voice crackled with excitement. "The competition rules don't forbid snatching eggs from each other. That means every champion is as dangerous as the magical creature guarding the egg." He let the implication hang for a beat, then added with a wink, "I can only wish the Durmstrang champions luck, although, as judge and commentator, that's a bit unprofessional." Laughter rolled through the crowd, but it died quickly. On screen, the three figures were now within 50 meters of the shelter. Crumb led, with Louis and Katya close behind. They moved with light, almost soundless steps. The bonfire brightened, the shelter's silhouette grew clearer, and the still figure on the pallet remained motionless. Crumb held his breath and raised his wand. Then the figure on the bed blurred. Like paper soaked through, it began to vanish from the edges, becoming translucent. Crumb stared, stunned, as the figure dissolved into motes of light and shadow and drifted away. The wooden pallet sat empty. "Looking for me?" a calm voice said from the dark behind them. In the night silence, it was explosive, like a clap of thunder. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh! Three spells flashed from the tips of the champions' wands, stabbing into the night with blinding light. They hit nothing, spells that fizzled off into the trees, stirring leaves and dropping them like rain. "What? Trying to steal my egg?" the voice said again, closer now, so close it felt almost against them. Louis felt a cold sweat beat at his back. He turned slowly. Nothing. Only the swaying shadow of trees. He shook his head, stammering, "We're not here. It's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." Silence fell, brief as 3 seconds, but stretched to eternity for Louis. Then, in an instant, a hand shot from the black and clamped around Katya's throat with unerring precision. Boom! A dull impact shook the leaves. Katya's back slammed into a large tree trunk, bark cracking under the force. His feet kicked free of the ground. He dangled in the air. "Ah!" Katya choked out a sound and flailed. His hands scrabbled for his wand, but it had fallen somewhere. His legs thrashed wildly, trying to strike their captor. His mouth opened to cry a spell. The grip tightened. Lynn's face emerged from the dark, mere inches from Katya. One hand held Katya against the tree. "You never learn, do you?" Katya gasped, strength fading, his face turning scarlet, eyes wide with fear. Lynn tilted his head and smiled. "To be honest, sometimes I really feel," he added an extra squeeze for emphasis, "that a fistfight is much more satisfying than flinging spells." At that moment, a beam of black light blew in from behind. It struck Katya, not Lynn. A rumbling sound like a belly upset echoed, followed by a horrid stench. Lynn's face darkened. With a flick of his wrist, he flung Katya away. "Damn!" Lynn barked. "I knew Durmstrang taught dark arts, but this is too much. Hurting your own classmate? That's going too far. I'll teach you a lesson on behalf of your headmaster." Crumb, stunned, couldn't understand how their stealth had been thwarted so easily. There was no time to think. He raised his wand and prepared to strike again. Lynn didn't give him the chance. He had already drawn his wand. "Crumb is performing a flying trapeze act for everyone," Ludo shouted, as if narrating a stunt. From the darkness, a phantom of an erumpent burst forth at Lynn's command, let out a furious roar, and charged. Crumb was hit by the impact and sent hurtling through the air, skidding across the ground for more than 10 meters. Chapter 244, Dumbledore. It will hurt for at most 2 days. Like Katya, Crumb was slammed violently into a large tree. The force of the impact made the trunk shudder. Leaves cascaded down, plastering his hair and face. He hit the ground with a heavy thud, his body bouncing twice, rolling half a turn, and finally lying face down and still. From Lynn's quick appraisal, Krum had probably broken several ribs. Lynn withdrew his gaze and looked at Lewis. Lewis was frozen where he stood, wand clutched in his hand, statue still. "Aren't you going to check on your classmates?" Lynn asked. Lewis hesitated, then took a step toward Krum. Before he could reach him, a chain shot from the tip of Lynn's wand, snaking around Lewis's ankle with perfect accuracy. Lewis had time for only a startled cry before the chain yanked him off his feet. He flew through the air in an arc. He crashed into the bushes and landed right on top of Katya. Katya had been lying there already, groaning, struck by Krum's dark arts, stomach in knots, reeling from a foul stench that wouldn't stop coming. He was as helpless as a washed-up fish. Now 100+ pounds of another boy slammed onto him from above. Pfft! Pain exploded through Katya all at once. Ribs, spine, stomach, the incessant churn of his bowels. He felt like he might split in two. Louis scrambled to get up, panicked, but the chain still held his ankle. He toppled back and crushed Katya again. Katya made a deathly sound. "Sorry. I'm sorry." Louis babbled, though it wasn't clear who he meant. Lynn walked over slowly and looked down at the two miserable Durmstrang champions. Louis looked up at him, eyes wide. "Still want to steal?" Lynn asked. Louis shook his head so violently his whole body rattled, the speed and intensity verging on comical. "No more stealing, no more. Absolutely not. I swear on my wand. I swear on Krum's wand. I swear on all of Durmstrang." Lynn raised an eyebrow. "I know you didn't propose it," he said. "From start to finish you were hesitating, objecting, trying to stop them." Louis blinked. "That's why I only tripped you," Lynn added. "I didn't pin you to a tree, didn't fling you 10 meters, just a little fall. For show." Louis's face said it all. "So I'm supposed to thank you?" Lynn read it instantly. "What's that look for?" he asked, tilting his head. "Say thank you." Louis swallowed, glanced at Lynn's calm face, then down at Katya beneath him, and forced the words out. "Thank you," Lynn nodded, satisfied, and changed the subject. "Where's your token?" Louis's color drained. His mouth hung open. His eyes flicked left, right, up into the tree canopy, anywhere but at Lynn. "Not talking? Then I'll have to use legilimency." Lynn raised his wand and aimed it at Louis's forehead. "I'm not exactly gentle," he warned. "Legilimency might hurt a bit. I might see things I'd rather not, and I might accidentally scramble your brain. You sure you want to try?" Louis went from white to blue to green. I'll talk. He pointed frantically toward Krum. "Krum's pocket. His pocket's got an undetectable extension charm. There's one inside." Lynn glanced where he pointed. Krum still lay motionless face down. Lynn knelt and searched him. Louis stayed frozen in the bushes, feelings churning. All he could do was pray that Lynn would take the token and leave, that this nightmare would end quickly. Lynn pulled a bulging pouch from Krum's pocket, opened it, and peered inside. Then he looked up at Louis. "Just one?" His tone carried suspicion, an edge that said, "Don't lie to me." "Just one. Really, just one," Louis pleaded. Lynn studied him for 2 seconds, then tilted his head and looked at the little token in his hand. "Tsk, how pathetic." Louis had no reply. He opened his mouth and felt the words die. What could he say? That Durmstrang wasn't pathetic? That they were formidable? The evidence lay before him. He chose silence. Lynn weighed the token in his palm, then reached into his own pocket and produced 2 more, holding all 3 up so they caught the moonlight. Louis' eyes widened. 3. Lynn had gathered all 3 himself. Lynn tucked them back into his pocket and patted it. Louis almost sobbed with relief. 3 tokens meant the task was complete. It meant Lynn could withdraw. It meant they could get away. "Haven't you finished the task?" Louis shouted. "Why aren't you leaving yet?" Lynn looked at him, then flicked his hand through the air. An invisible smack landed across Louis' face, hard enough to daze but not to injure. Louis clutched his cheek, stunned. "Who said I had to leave just because I finished the task?" Lynn asked calmly. "The rules only say that gathering 3 tokens counts as completing the task," Lynn continued. "They don't say I must leave once I have 3. I can stay if I want, stay until the whole project ends." "I don't let grudges go overnight," Lynn said without malice. "You think this settles it? You 3 sneaked into my camp in the middle of the night to steal my tokens. You were caught red-handed, and you think 1 hit each settles the score?" Louis had no answer. Lynn's gaze swept over the battered Louis and Katya, then to the prone Crumb. From now until the end of this project, I'm watching you. Wherever you go, I follow. You won't get a single token. Louis went completely white. Lynn gave him a gentle, friendly smile, harmless on the surface, but in Louis's eyes more terrifying than any hex. A personal grudge, Lynn said. Who told you to make the first move? He turned and walked toward his tent. After a few steps he paused, looked back, and added, By the way, get some good rest tonight. See you tomorrow. He waved once and melted into the dark. At the Quidditch pitch, the crowd erupted. Laughter rolled through the stadium like an avalanche. He's actually going to stalk them. A personal grudge. Durmstrang is finished. Completely finished. For the next 2 days and nights, they'll be living in Lynn's shadow. Ludo Bagman, barely keeping it together in the commentary box, cackled. Mr. Lynn has shown us a completely new competition strategy, he said between guffaws. Not completing the task, but torturing the opponents. He laughed so long he had to compose himself. Let us wish the Durmstrang champions a pleasant time over the next 2 days and nights. More roaring laughter rolled through the stands. At the judges' table, Karkaroff had risen. His face was ashen and he trembled as he pointed at the rulebook. Krum and Volok have been seriously injured. I demand Lynn be disqualified for such atrocious behavior. Before Dumbledore could reply, Madame Maxime cut in. Your school's champions can steal tokens from other schools. Why shouldn't others be allowed to fight back? Is it the same? Karkaroff snapped. Stealing tokens isn't life-threatening, but the champions have been severely hurt. If they don't receive treatment, people could die. Which Triwizard tournament hasn't seen deaths? Madame Maxime shot back. By your logic, did all those fallen champions die for nothing? Karkaroff's face filled with fury. He turned to Dumbledore for a ruling. Dumbledore hummed thoughtfully. In fact, they should be. Fine, he said at last. Didn't Lynn leave one student behind? As long as they don't run around, at most it will hurt for a couple of days. They'll recover. Karkaroff stood speechless. Early the next morning, the Quidditch pitch was already full of students. The sun had just crested the treetops of the Forbidden Forest, and the stands were a sea of people. The young fans waved flags of every color, faces alight with excitement and expectation. Many were clearly sleep-deprived, dark circles under their eyes, but their gazes were frighteningly bright. What else could you expect after yesterday's spectacle? The battle between the Flaming Dragon and the Frostwing, the night the 3 Durmstrang champions were humiliated, who would miss the sequel? I snuck out after curfew last night to see if anything else happened, a Gryffindor boy told his friend. I got caught by the old bat just as I left the common room. Me too, a Ravenclaw girl piped in. Filch was hiding round the corner with Mrs. Norris. Our house lost 20 points. What's 20 points? The Gryffindor said sourly. Gryffindor lost 35. Professor McGonagall looked like she'd turned green. She said if this keeps up, she'll dock us all for detention. At that moment, the giant screen flickered to life. Every head turned. Look, Ludo Bagman's voice rang across the pitch. A new day has begun. Our champions are on the move again. The screen switched through the camps. The Ilvermorny trio crouched by a stream, washing up, Ryan rubbing his eyes, hair a disheveled mess. Amina from Ouagadougou was already organized, giving orders to Nema and Wanjiru. Castellabruxo sat around a near-dead campfire, chewing on half-raw roasted mushrooms. Bobaton's footage showed Chloe a little brighter than yesterday, but still pale. Fleur was pouring water for her while Sophie stood watch. All 3 bore dark rings under their eyes. Then Hogwarts. Cedric, Harry, and Roger packed gear beneath a rock face. Harry looked nervous. Cedric patted his shoulder and said something that made him nod. And finally, Durmstrang. The moment the camera cut to them, the stands exploded with laughter. Crumb's face was ashen, his mood sour. He stood radiating a keep-away aura, a temporary bandage across his chest where Lynn had broken a rib. He grimaced with every step. Beside him, Katya looked pale, unsteady, occasionally gagging as though the earlier stench still lingered. Louis stood behind them, expression numb, eyes hollow, a defeated I-don't-care air about him. About 50 meters back, Lynn leaned against a tree, arms folded, watching them with calm amusement. He even waved at the camera. Ludo's voice took on a teasing undertone. It seems Mr. Lynn was serious when he said last night he'd keep an eye on them. Another roar of laughter went up. Durmstrang's nightmare has begun, someone shouted. Serves them right for stealing those things. Go, Lynn! And for the next 2 days and nights, it was exactly that for the Durmstrang champions, a nightmare. For the rest of the audience, it was a feast. Look, Ludo cried. Crumb's found a thestral nest. He's pulled an orb out of it. He's got it. Durmstrang has obtained an orb. Warm applause broke out. Before it died down, Ludo's voice went on. But look, the orb has been taken by Lynn. On the screen, Crumb had just shoved the orb into his pocket and hadn't even had time to smile when a hand slid in and plucked it away. Crumb's grin froze. He looked around. Lynn stood nearby, weighing the orb in his hand with a brilliant smile. Thanks, Lynn said, then tucked the orb into his own pocket and strolled off. Crumb stood rooted to the spot. Louis covered his face and uttered a groan. Katya lurched, began to gag. The crowd erupted in laughter. Look, Ludo chortled. Katya braved a cluster of ashwinders and found an orb. He risked being burned to a crisp. He's got it. Katya held the orb like a rescued treasure, relief and disbelief on his face. Then a gentle pluck, and the orb was gone. His expression dropped from euphoria to blankness to total collapse. He turned and saw the familiar figure behind him. Lynn waved the orb at him. Thanks. Katya's lips trembled. He tried to say something, but before he could, blur, he vomited again. The stands were in hysterics. A few hours later, Ludo called out again. Crumbs found a third orb in the territory of a pygmy puff. He gave it his all, rushed in. He's got it. Durmstrang has finally... Oh, how unfortunate. He still failed to protect it. On the screen, Crum trembled with fury, clutching the orb. How are you doing this? I searched 300 meters. There was no sign of you, he roared to empty air. A beat of silence, then a hand reached from behind, shoved the orb into Crumb's pocket, and then plucked it right back, the ultimate mockery. Crumb spun. Nobody there. He spun back. Lynn was standing 3 paces away, balancing the orb with a faint smile. Handcrafted decoy, Lynn said. Basic. Doesn't Durmstrang teach that? You even have an alchemy master, after all. Crumb's chest heaved. He opened his mouth to retort, but a stab of pain in his ribs cut him off. Lynn patted his shoulder. Keep at it, he said. 2 days left. Then he vanished into the woods. Crumb remained, sick with helpless anger. Louis approached cautiously. Crumb, maybe we should give up? Crumb said nothing. He kept staring in the direction Lynn had gone, chest heaving. The Durmstrang camp on the pitch was in an uproar. Students shook their fists and hurled insults at the big screen. This is cheating! How can he steal other people's orbs? Unfair. A few hotheads even scrambled toward the Hogwarts tents, but they were stopped in time by their prefects. Calm down. Everyone, calm down. A Durmstrang prefect threw up his arms, trying to hold the crowd back, face flushed. The match isn't over. We still have a chance, he pleaded, though even he sounded less than convinced. In the Hogwarts camp, the students laughed and whooped. Let them steal. Serves them right. Lynn's amazing. Go Durmstrang, just 2 more days. There was no attempt to hide the schadenfreude. 2 days, 2 nights. For the audience, a non-stop carnival of delight. For the 3 Durmstrang champions, a repeating nightmare. Whenever Crumb found an orb, Lynn appeared and took it. Whenever Katya found one, Lynn took it and enjoyed watching him gag. Louis never found a single orb. He spent the time trying to restrain Crumb and Katya from searching, to no avail. The task is over. Ludo Bagman's voice crackled from the small recording devices each champion carried. All champions, please touch the device near you. It will bring you to the Quidditch pitch. The Durmstrang trio brightened like the sun coming out. Crack, crack, crack. The familiar sensation of the world tilting swirled around them, and then all 19 champions materialized in the center of the pitch. Sunlight flooded them, and the stands erupted in mountain-moving cheers. The judges sat in golden chairs on a raised platform. 6 judges, plus 2 Ministry of Magic officials, made up the 8-person panel. Ludo stood in the center and cleared his throat. The first task is complete, he announced. Judges, please score each school's performance. The points will count toward the final score. School crests flashed on the big screen, each with an empty score column beside it. Beauxbatons went first. Clips replayed. The Beauxbaton champions attacked by red fire ants. Chloe wounded, the hard-won orb, the long trudge and rest. The judges raised their cards. Madame Maxime was first, 8 points. Her face serene, but her eyes said she'd done what she could. Picari, 5 points. Okoye, 4. Lima, 4. Arthur, 5. Bagman, 5. Then Karkaroff, expressionless, held up his card. 0. A chorus of boos washed over the stands. Angry shouts rose from the Beauxbatons camp, but Karkaroff didn't so much as glance their way. The final tally read 35 points. Madame Maxime kept a polite smile, but inwardly she was furious. Just wait until Durmstrang's score comes up, she thought. Next was Hogwarts. Albus Dumbledore was first to raise a card, 8 points. Then Karkaroff again, expressionless, and another 0 card held up. Boos rose from the crowd. We invite Principal Karkaroff to state the reason for his score. Karkaroff glanced at Ludo and said slowly, "The Hogwarts champions formed an illegal team. One of the eggs was only kept because Lynn helped them block the Frostwing dragon." Final score, 45 points. Next came Castello Bruxo. The playback showed the trio relying on thick hides to take an egg from the centaurs, then a long, aimless journey with only occasional exploration. The judges began to score. Karkaroff, 0 points. Reason? Principal Lima's voice was barely restrained anger. Karkaroff remained expressionless. Lack of initiative. After obtaining 1 egg, they did nothing, wandering around the Forbidden Forest the rest of the time. Does that performance deserve points? Lima's face flushed. His hands gripped the armrests as if he might stand. Madame Maxime squeezed his arm and murmured something. He took a deep breath and sat back down. Final score, 38 points. Next was Ouagadou. Unsurprisingly, Karkaroff again held up a 0. Reason? Okoye's voice was soft but laced with challenge. Karkaroff adjusted his glasses. The other 2 Ouagadou students played no part. Only Amina led, made decisions, and fought. This is a team event, not a solo show. Okoye stared for 2 seconds, then smiled, polite and gentle in appearance, but his words were sharp. Principal Karkaroff, are those things in your eye sockets tumors? If they are, you should visit St. Mungo's. If not, you might need new glasses. Anyone who can lie like that with their eyes wide open needs one. Laughter rippled through the stands. Karkaroff's face flushed. He looked for a retort, but Okoye had already turned away. Final score, 54 points. Ilvermorny came next. Karkaroff again held up 0, this time without explanation. Just the sign, put down, and a smug lean back. Picari glanced at him, saying nothing, but the look was a warning. Just you wait. Final score, 58 points. Finally, it was Durmstrang's turn. The big screen replayed their days. Crumb leading, finding an egg on the first day, only for Lynn to take it. Katya found one, and Lynn took it. Crumb found another, and Lynn took it. For 2 whole days and nights, Durmstrang hadn't managed to keep a single egg. On the last day, Crumb tried again, but there were only so many eggs in the forest, and the remaining ones were in places too dangerous for them in their condition. The final tally, 0 eggs. The replay ended and a giant 0 filled the screen. Laughter spread through the stands. The judges started to raise their cards. Madame Maxime was first, 0 points, her smile unbearably bright. Fair and just, she said. Picari was next, 0 points, calmly placed down. Okoye, 0 points. Lack of initiative, she mimicked Karkaroff. Does that merit points? Limo points. Teamwork? I saw none. Arthur hesitated, glanced at Karkaroff. Karkaroff's face had gone as dark as it could. Arthur sighed and raised 0. Bagman shrugged and held up 0. Rules are rules, he said. 0 harvest is 0 harvest, even if I sympathize. Dumbledore, too, held up 0. Then Karkaroff's turn. His face was magnified on the screen, ashen, with an ugly mix of despair. Principal Karkaroff, Bagman prompted, your turn. Karkaroff drew a slow breath and raised his card. 1 point. Boos exploded from the crowd. 1 point! How dare he? He gave everyone else 0s and gives himself 1. Madame Maxime laughed. Principal Karkaroff, are you sure that's appropriate? Karkaroff ground his teeth out loud, syllable by syllable. I believe Durmstrang should receive 1 point as encouragement. Encouragement for what? Picari scoffed. For being targeted all night and day by one person? The stands erupted in laughter again. Karkaroff's face turned black with mortification. In the end, Durmstrang's score stood at 1 point, a record low that would be remembered. The numbers froze on the screen. For a heartbeat, the stadium was still. Then laughter swelled again. After the laughter died down, Ludo Bagman cleared his throat and raised a hand for quiet. Now then, his voice rang through the Quidditch pitch. There is still one champion who has yet to be scored by the judges. Let us invite the judges to rate the champion of Azkaban. Lynn's face darkened. The stands fell silent, everyone holding their breath. The first judge's image filled the big screen. The old headmaster smiled without hiding it, then raised his card. 10 points. Cheers roared. Dumbledore gives 10 points. Madame Maxime followed elegantly. 10 points. The other principals had no quarrel with Lynn's performance. They all raised 10 after 10. Ludo and Arthur were no exception. The cheers swelled as 7 tens gleamed on the screen. Then the camera swung to the last judge, Karkaroff. The stadium held its breath. His face, huge on the screen, was knotted with indecision. Brows drawn, lips tight, eyes flicking. In his hands were the 2 cards, 0 and 10, each raised and lowered as if he could not decide. He thought of Durmstrang's ruined champions, Crumb with broken ribs, Katia jinxed and dry heaving, Louis all but hopeless. Could he give Lynn points and risk the fallout? Then he thought of the string of zeros he'd already given. Beauxbaton 0, Hogwarts 0, Castellabruxo 0, Ouagadou 0, Ilvermorny 0. If he now gave Lynn 10, wouldn't that be a slap in the face to himself? Whispers rose. What is he doing? What's there to hesitate about? Doesn't Lynn deserve 10? Surely Karkaroff won't give 0 now. Does he dare? In the Durmstrang camp, students stared at the screen, breathless. Crumb stood at the center of the pitch, fixed on Karkaroff. His lips moved as if pleading. Seconds dragged. Karkaroff's hand trembled. Finally, he shut his eyes, took a deep breath, and raised the card. 10 points. Thunderous cheers broke out. Karkaroff gave 10 points. He actually did it. You gave it to Lynn? Karkaroff put the card down, leaned back, closed his eyes, and told himself it was a strategic compromise. 8 tens gleamed on the screen. Total, 80 points. Ludo Bagman's voice nearly cracked with excitement. Congratulations to Mr. Lynn. With an absolute advantage of 80 points, he takes first place in the first event. The stands exploded in cheers. The Hufflepuff section went wild. Edgar stood at the front, waving a flag above his head until his arms ached. William and Ollie stood behind him, proud, though less raucous. Students from other houses joined in the applause. In the center of the pitch, Lynn stood with a faint smile, waving to the crowd as screams followed him. Then he turned his head and looked at the 3 Durmstrang champions. Crumb, Katia, and Louis stood together, bodies taut, staring at him with guarded expressions. The corners of Lynn's mouth lifted into the same smile he'd worn the night before when he told them, "I'll be watching you." A chill ran through the 3 of them. All 3 thought the same thing at once. Wait, it's still not over? Chapter 247. The scoring was finished, and Ludo Bagman walked back to the center of the pitch. He cleared his throat until the crowd quieted. Ahem, well done, everyone. His gaze swept the 19 champions standing at the edge of the pitch. A bright smile lit his face. Now, I have a few words to say. The cheers waned as everyone leaned forward to listen. The second task will take place next February, Ludo announced clearly across the grounds. In the meantime, the champions will have a long period to rest. Heal your wounds, get back into top form, and prepare for the challenges ahead. The 3 Durmstrang champions' faces brightened immediately. That meant they wouldn't have to see Lynn for a long time. Wonderful. However, Ludo continued, cutting short their pleasant thoughts. I have left you with a few problems to consider. He pointed to the golden eggs in the champions' hands. The golden eggs you hold can only be opened under certain special circumstances. When opened, they will provide you with clues for the second task. A hush fell over the crowd as every eye fixed on the eggs. Remember, Ludo's expression grew serious. Do not force them open. That will bring you misfortune of the very unpleasant kind. Lynn looked down at the 6 golden eggs in his arms. The other champions had at most 1 or 2. Some had none at all, like the 3 from Durmstrang, who were empty-handed and could only stare longingly at Lynn's 6. Lynn frowned and thought, only to be opened under special circumstances? That didn't sound right. He turned an egg over in his hands, studying it. The shell was smooth, without pattern or marking, and looked like an ordinary golden egg. Is everything clear? Ludo called, breaking Lynn's train of thought. Any questions? No one spoke. Good. Ludo nodded in satisfaction. Champions, please go and rest. Spending 3 days and nights in the Forbidden Forest is no easy feat. Get a good night's sleep, have a hearty meal, and we shall see you again in February." One by one, the champions left the field. Cedric patted Lynn on the shoulder, murmured "well done," and walked off with Harry and Roger. Fleur left with Cho and Sophie, Cho's steps still a little unsteady. Ryan waved at Lynn before being pulled away by Thomas and Jordan. Amina gave only a small nod before melting into the crowd with Nima and Wanjiru. The three Durmstrang champions hurried the fastest, practically running out of the pitch and glancing back as if terrified Lynn might give chase. The champions had stepped down, but the stands only grew louder. Someone shouted first, "You Durmstrang lot, don't you leave!" And the voice was the match to oil. The roar spread instantly. "Right, don't let them run away. Beat them up. Those thieves, stealing the golden eggs. Weren't they arrogant when Karkaroff gave them zeros? Don't run now." Students from the 5 schools surged down from the stands like a tide, charging toward the Durmstrang spectator area. The momentum and the noise made the whole place feel like a small war. The Durmstrang students were surrounded before they could react. "What are you doing? Stop! This is a pitch, not a battlefield," someone yelled. "Professor! Professor!" others cried. "Where were the teachers? Stop! You must stop fighting," Madame Maxime shouted once, and then she slumped sideways against the back of her chair and closed her eyes. "I tried," she murmured. "I really tried." Ludo Bagman stood in the middle of the pitch, looking left and right, and then he crouched and pretended to tie his shoelaces, though his shoes didn't even have laces. Only Karkaroff was still roaring. "Stop! All of you stop! This is barbaric! This is an insult to Durmstrang! I shall complain to the International Confederation of Wizards. I shall—" Before he could finish, his words were drowned by thunderous cries for blood. The students stormed the Durmstrang stands. Fists and robes flew, curses and screams braided together. "That's for stealing the golden eggs. That's for the zeros. That's for Karkaroff. We can't hit Karkaroff, but we can certainly hit you." The Durmstrang students scattered like rats, but with people all around them, there was nowhere to go. A few reached for their wands to fight back, but the moment they raised a hand, they were pinned to the ground by 7 or 8 opponents. The scene was chaotic. Professor McGonagall stood at the edge of the stands, watching with a frown so deep it could have crushed a fly. It was utterly lacking in decorum, a group of students lying about, how improper. She drew a breath and pulled a telephone from her robe pocket. She dialed. "Ring, ring, Poppy," she said. From the other end came Madame Pomfrey's confused voice. "Minerva, what is it? Has something happened?" McGonagall looked out at the bedlam and took a steadying breath. "Poppy," she said, "the time has come to test your skills." There was a 2-second silence. Then Madame Pomfrey's incredulous voice, "What?" Lynn walked back toward the castle with Cedric, Harry, and Roger. Sunlight spilled along the path at the edge of the forbidden forest, stretching their shadows long. Faint cheers and screams still drifted from the Quidditch pitch. The brawl there hadn't died down. "That was one crazy task," Cedric said, rubbing his still aching shoulder. 3 days and nights felt like 3 years. Harry nodded, looking unsettled. "I still can't believe we survived, especially that Frostwing dragon." He shuddered and didn't finish. Roger walked behind, checking his wand as he went and muttering to himself. Lynn led the way, cradling the 6 golden eggs, which glittered so brightly in the setting sun it was hard to look directly at them. Cedric couldn't help staring at the pile. "Lynn," he asked, "you got 6 of them all by yourself. Don't you wonder what's inside?" Lynn thought a moment. "My main thought is, they're quite heavy." Cedric blinked. "No, I mean what's actually hidden inside these eggs. Clues for the second task?" Lynn stopped and turned back. "Now that you mention it," he said, "it is worth investigating." He set the 6 eggs on a flat roadside rock and crouched to examine them. Cedric and the others gathered, forming a small circle around the pile. "They look like ordinary golden eggs," Roger said, reaching toward one. "Just a bit heavy." "There must be some kind of mechanism," Harry said, frowning. "Ludo did say they can only be opened under special circumstances." "What special circumstances?" Cedric asked. "Submerge in water? Put in a fire? Do we need a specific spell?" Lynn stared at the eggs for a long moment, then his eyes suddenly darted. "Look closely," he said, pointing to one. "I remember there being a very thin seam." They all leaned in until their eyes nearly touched the shell. "A seam?" Where? How come I didn't see it? Lynn traced the shell lightly. Right here. It's a very thin line. You wouldn't notice it unless you looked closely. Cedric squinted and then his eyes lit up. I see it! Right here! He jabbed at the spot, voice rising with excitement. Harry and Roger crowded in. Where? Where? There really is a seam. It's so thin you'd never notice it without looking. They buzzed with ideas. So we pry it open from here? With what? Our wands? Could it be trapped? Will prying it trigger something? Who cares? Let's just open it. Lynn stepped to the side, watching the three of them enthusiastically plotting how to pry the egg. A small smile played on his lips. He took 2 quiet steps back, then raised his wand and tapped his ear. A pair of earplugs appeared out of thin air and fitted snugly. The world went instantly hushed. Satisfied, Lynn crossed his arms and stood back 3 meters, ready to watch. Across the rock, Cedric, Harry, and Roger had come to an agreement. Let's pry together, Cedric said. 3 wands at once should do it. Right, Harry nodded. Let's do it. Roger rolled up his sleeves. The 3 of them raised their wands, aimed at the fine seam, and pushed simultaneously. Click. The egg opened. Chapter 248, Not a Good Person. The 18 cracked open. Then, ripples you could see radiated outward from the sound was so shrill it sliced through the air like a chorus of cats or a train whistle blown inches from your ear. Cedric's face contorted instantly. Harry Potter's glasses slipped down his nose. Roger's mouth formed a perfect O. He froze as if struck by lightning. The 3 of them fell backward at the same time. Bang! 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 3 heavy thuds as they landed, lying stiff on the path with eyes rolled back and limbs splayed, motionless. The 18's scream lasted 3 seconds and then stopped abruptly. Silence reclaimed the path. Lynn stood 3 meters away, arms folded, looking down at the 3 fallen students. He removed one earplug and listened tentatively. Nothing. He took out the other. Still nothing. Only the distant sounds of the Quidditch pitch and Madame Pomfrey's faint shouts. Lynn walked over, crouched, and examined their faces. Cedric's eyes were half open, pupils dilated. A foolish smile lingered on his lips. Harry's glasses sat askew. He was completely unconscious, but his chest rose and fell, so he was alive. Roger was the most exaggerated of the 3, mouth wide, tongue nearly protruding. Lynn was silent for 2 seconds, then stood and dusted off his hands as if brushing off imaginary dirt. Time to go, time to go. That evening, the Hufflepuff Common Room hosted another celebration. The fire burned high in the hearth, casting orange-red flames that warmed the space. Pumpkin lanterns hung from the ceiling, their soft light mingling with the fire, making the room feel cozy the moment anyone entered. The entrance was jammed. In fact, almost every Hufflepuff student was there. They perched 2 and 3 to a sofa back, on carpets, even along windowsills, filling the usually roomy common room to bursting. Several long tables had been pushed together and piled high with treats, mountains of cookies in every flavor, honey, chocolate, cream, and a few suspiciously green cookies made by a certain 7th-year senior. There were mountains of cakes. A 3-tier cake sat among them, elaborately decorated. Plates of cupcakes glittered with golden frosting under the firelight. Pitchers of pumpkin juice and steaming butterbeer circulated, and of course, several cases of Lynn's favorite cola were stacked in the corner. Lynn. The moment he stepped in, he was swallowed by a crowd. Congratulations. That's amazing. 6 18s, facing down Durmstrang for 2 days and 2 nights. Cheers, applause, and whistles filled his ears. The crowd shoved him to the front of the long tables, and he saw a banner, a huge golden fabric banner nearly covering the wall. It read, "Congratulations to the champion of Hogwarts, Azkaban, on their triumphant return." Lynn stared at the parentheses for a second. "The banner's lovely," he said, "but it would be lovelier without what's in the parentheses." "No way." A 3rd-year girl shook her head. "Why not?" Lynn asked. "Because we should be honest," another boy answered solemnly. "You are the champion of Azkaban," someone else said. "The 9 certified it. You can't fake that." Right, a cluster nearby chimed in. "We can't lie." Lynn opened his mouth to retort and found he couldn't. "But no buts." Edgar squeezed through the crowd and threw an arm around Lynn's shoulder. "Just accept it. Champion of Azkaban. How impressive." "Impressive, my foot." Lynn rolled his eyes. "Why isn't it impressive?" Edgar protested. Did you see how scared those three from Durmstrang were today? Victor Crumb went green, and Katya and Lewis. Ha! I laughed just thinking about it. Laughter rolled around them. Lynn sighed and gave up resisting. All right, he said, grabbing a bottle of cola and taking a sip. As long as it makes you happy. Of course we're happy. Edgar pulled him to the head of the table. Today you're the star. Eat, drink, and don't overthink it. William Smith and Ollie Thorne squeezed in beside him. Seriously, William said, pushing up his glasses. That parenthetical actually makes it memorable. From now on, when people hear your name, Champion of Azkaban will be the first thing they think. Easy to remember. Easy to remember, yes, Lynn said, taking another swig of cola. But it doesn't make me sound like a good person. You were never a good person. Ollie Thorne's rare remark was flat and factual. Lynn almost choked on his cola and, without thinking, shot back. How am I not a good person? Ollie didn't answer. William didn't answer. Edgar merely grinned. Lynn fell silent and thought of the things he'd done. Then he raised his cola. All right, he said, I'm not a good person. Laughter erupted around him. That's more like it. Edgar raised his butterbeer. A toast to the Champion of Azkaban who isn't a good person. Cheers! Dozens of cups clinked together. After the celebrations, December settled over Hogwarts. The weather dropped colder daily, with sleet and fierce winds. Icicles hung from the trees at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Frost flowers traced the windows of the castle, and students hurried through corridors wrapped in thick robes. The Black Lake, once lively, saw few visitors. The chill cut to the bone. Durmstrang's large ship remained anchored in the center of the lake, rocking in the wind. At the lake's edge, someone sat on his favorite rock, cradling his prized 16. The sky was a flat gray and tiny snowflakes fluttered down. A thin film of ice formed across the water. He used his 27 to melt a small hole and cast his line. The wind whipped and his robes snapped. Lynn hunched his shoulders, blew on his hands, and fixed his eyes on the bobber. In this weather, the fish must be starving, he muttered. They should be easy to catch. Minutes passed and the float stayed motionless. He wasn't in a hurry. He simply watched the little bobber like the rest of the world didn't exist. Then suddenly, the float plunged. Lynn's eyes lit up. He flicked his wrist and the 16 bowed in his hand. Hey, I've got a bite. He pulled eagerly, but the resistance felt light. He frowned and reeled. A palm-sized fish flopped out, tail thrashing desperately. Lynn stared at it for 3 full seconds. The fish blinked back at him. He plucked the hook free, slapped the small fish twice, and said, "Go find your parents." With a flick of his hand, the fish arced through the air and splashed back into the water. Gone. Lynn rebaited and cast again. "I'll catch a big one today," he muttered. "I'm sure I will." Footsteps crunched in the snow behind him. "Lynn," a familiar voice cut the wind. Lynn turned. Cedric Diggory approached, bundled in robes and a hat. "Good afternoon, Cedric," Lynn said. "Everything all right?" Cedric looked at the 16 in Lynn's hand and then at the empty bucket beside him and nearly laughed. "I knew you'd be here," he said, "without your 15. Lynn scratched his head with an embarrassed smile. "I'm fishing, you know. Looking at my 15 ruins my concentration." "Concentration?" Cedric glanced again at the empty bucket, brow tight. "Professor Dumbledore has asked everyone to be in the Great Hall for dinner. I've informed the other years you're the only one left." "Everyone to the Great Hall?" Lynn asked in surprise. "Any idea why?" "No idea," Cedric shrugged. "Probably an announcement. Maybe something about the second task or the Christmas schedule." "Okay, I'll pack." He didn't finish. A sudden enormous tug slammed into the 16. The force was so violent Lynn's hand nearly dislocated. He clutched the rod, but the pull yanked it forward. Whoosh! The rod slipped from his grasp, arced, and the 16 plunged into the Black Lake, disappearing beneath the surface in an instant. Lynn froze, still in the motion of gripping the rod. Cedric, equally stunned, watched the ripples spread. For a full 3 seconds, neither spoke. "Did that just?" Cedric asked cautiously. Lynn looked at his empty hand and at the fading ripples, then said deadpan, "A really big fish. A very, very big fish," he added, as if stating an obvious fact. "The sort of fish that could pull a 16 away." Cedric opened his mouth but had no words. Lynn took a breath and let it out slowly. "Never mind," he said, dusting snow from his robes. "Let's go. Dinner can't be missed. A 16 can be replaced." They started back toward the castle. Chapter 249, Dinner Time. The students in the Great Hall weren't rushing to eat as usual. They sat in small knots along the long tables, whispering and speculating about why Dumbledore had been so late. At the Hufflepuff table, Lynn had his nose buried in a plate of roasted lamb chops. The juices overflowed, the outside crisp, the inside tender. He'd inhaled 3 pieces in one sitting and was gearing up for a fourth. Edgar sat beside him, idly prodding the mashed potatoes with his fork. "What do you think the headmaster wants to say by gathering everyone?" Edgar asked, nudging Lynn's arm. "Could it be about the second task?" With his mouth stuffed, Lynn mumbled, "Probably not." Edgar didn't catch him. Lynn swallowed, took a sip of pumpkin juice, and said calmly, "If it were about the tournament, the champions from the other schools should all be here. No matter how much Karkaroff hates it, he'd attend a dinner where something important is announced, right?" Edgar nodded. "Makes sense." Lynn pointed his fork toward the high table. "And look, Madame Maxime, Picquery, none of them are here. That means it's not about the tournament. It's something internal to Hogwarts." William, nearby, added, "Could it be about the Christmas ball?" "A ball?" Lynn turned to look, puzzled. William was about to explain when Dumbledore entered by the side door. The old headmaster wore deep purple robes embroidered with stars and moons, his silver beard neatly groomed. He seemed in a good mood, chatting with Professor Moody at his side, his smile gentle. Moody walked beside him. Even without his magical eye, his remaining one kept darting about, alert as ever. The two took their places at the high table. Dumbledore dabbed at the corner of his mouth with a napkin, though he hadn't eaten, and slowly poured himself a cup of tea. He showed no immediate sign of standing to speak. The students grew restless. What is he going to say? Why hasn't he started? I'm getting sleepy. Edgar nudged Lynn again. When do you think he'll speak? Lynn shrugged. Just wait. It's not like we're in a rush. He picked up another lamb chop. At last, after several more minutes of quiet conversation between Dumbledore and Moody, Dumbledore set down his cup and stood. He cleared his throat and let his gaze sweep the great hall. You must all be very curious, he said with a smile, as to why I asked everyone to come to dinner. Tell us, came the chorus below. Hurry up, headmaster. I'm almost falling asleep. You guessed correctly, Dumbledore went on. It's the Christmas ball. The great hall erupted. The Christmas ball! Really? Finally! Cheers rose and voices hummed with excitement. Lynn felt oddly that someone was staring at him. He didn't dare turn around. Edgar went on excitedly. A ball! My God, I need new robes. Dark blue? Dark green? Lynn pretended not to hear and kept eating, head bowed. After a moment, Dumbledore glanced toward Professor McGonagall with a wink. McGonagall returned the look expressionlessly. Clearly, her face was saying, You started it, you finish it. Dumbledore winked again as if to say, It's awkward for an old man to do the stern bits. McGonagall's mouth twitched. She drew a breath and rose. A single cough from McGonagall, quiet but authoritative, cut through the noise. Listen to the headmaster finish, she said. Dumbledore's smile flickered. A stealthy takedown? He laughed a little and continued. Now the requirements for the ball. An ominous silence spread. Dumbledore went on. The ball is open to students in 4th year and above. He paused, letting younger faces register disappointment. But if you wish, you may choose a younger student as a partner, provided the younger student agrees. Younger students brightened at once. Dumbledore continued. The ball will begin at 8 o'clock on Christmas night, and it will be held here in the Great Hall. The hall will be newly decorated, and there will be a live band. He added, Please remember to wear your dress robes. This is a rare occasion, and I hope everyone will enjoy the evening. After that, Dumbledore didn't wait for reactions. He raised his hand. Snap. Fawkes appeared out of nowhere and perched on Dumbledore's shoulder. Dumbledore waved, and in an instant, the man and the bird flared into a ball of fire and vanished with astonishing speed. Dinner ended. Students rose and filed toward the doors in small groups. Chairs scraped loudly, house elves cleared the plates, and the warm scent of food lingered in the air. Lynn sat unmoving at the Hufflepuff table. He felt more eyes on him than before. Many of them, coming from all directions. Curious, appraising, amused, a few obviously smirking. He kept his head down and stared at the wood grain as if studying it intently, thinking absurdly. This table sure is a table. This floor sure is a floor. Edgar stretched. Let's go back to the common room. I'm exhausted, need a good night's sleep. Lynn was about to stand when a familiar voice rang from the high table. Hogwarts champions, please stay behind for a moment, said Professor McGonagall. Lynn froze. He almost turned when he heard Edgar whisper, You're the champion of Azkaban. Lynn glared at him. Edgar shrugged innocently. Just stating the facts. Lynn took a deep breath, about to snap back, when McGonagall spoke again, as if correcting herself. The champion of the Higher Institute, please stay behind as well. Lynn, Edgar beamed with satisfaction. Yes, yes, this time she actually called you. Lynn's mouth twitched as he pointed at Edgar. You beep, beep, beep. Chapter 250, Burp. When most of the students had left the Great Hall, Professor McGonagall's attention rested on the 4 champions before her. Cedric, Harry, Roger, and Lynn stood in a line, Lynn at the far end, looking a little distracted. McGonagall nodded with approval. As is tradition, she said, the Yule Ball will be opened by the champions and their dates. This is part of the tournament and an important way to show off Hogwarts' manners. Her eyes passed over the 4 young faces, each showing something different. Do you understand? Of course, Professor. Cedric answered first, steady and smiling. His glance slipped toward the side door of the hall, where Cho Chang stood, slightly out of breath and holding an envelope. Obviously, she'd come specifically for him. She caught his look, curled the tiniest smile, and waved the envelope. Cedric's smile deepened. McGonagall followed his gaze and allowed herself a small laugh. It seems Mr. Diggory is already prepared. Cedric looked briefly embarrassed, but mostly pleased. McGonagall turned to the others. Lynn, Potter, and Mr. Davies, what about you? Roger Davies considered for a moment and then nodded. His face was calm. He already seemed to have things planned. Harry said nothing, his eyes wandering. He looked inward, uncertain. Lynn at the end kept twisting his lips before finally forcing out, Professor, can the ball not? No. McGonagall's reply was short, sharp, and absolute. Lynn fell silent, swallowing the rest of his sentence. Fine, he had nothing more to add. Satisfied, McGonagall moved on. As the opening of the ball, many people will be watching you. The teachers and students of the school, officials from the ministry, everyone will be watching you step onto the dance floor and perform the first dance. She looked at them in turn. If you dance like a mess and become a laughingstock, it won't be just your own reputations at stake. It's the reputation of Hogwarts, of your houses, of the whole British wizarding community. Her words were heavy but true. Lynn's face grew serious. He thought hard. The mooncalf dance? Would that work? The way they hop and spin under the moonlight, mooncalves look quite graceful dancing. The more he thought about it, the more possible it seemed. Then he caught McGonagall's eye. She watched him with the coldness of a December wind. He shoved the idea straight out of his head. Not a chance. McGonagall would devour him whole. Seeing Lynn's frown, McGonagall tried a gentler tack. You don't know how to dance? Lynn nodded stiffly. Professor, he began, helplessness in his voice. Stop! McGonagall cut him off. Mr. Lynn, do not say that. He closed his mouth. She inhaled, then let the breath out more softly. It doesn't matter if you don't know. This weekend morning I will be holding a dance lesson in the Great Hall. Come then. Her gaze on Lynn was pointed. And bring a date. Lynn fell silent again. McGonagall stopped looking at him and faced the other champions. The same goes for you. You may come at any time if you need help. I would rather not see Hogwarts' champions making fools of themselves at the ball. She tucked her notes away with a look of satisfaction. All right, that's everything. You may go. The 4 champions turned to leave. Cedric strode toward the door, where Cho waited. She handed him the envelope with a small, formal smile. Would you like me to be your date, Mr. Diggory? Cedric reached for it, about to answer, when a long hiccup came from beside him. Lynn! Someone shouted. Word of the Yule Ball spread like wildfire. In the corridors, in classrooms, in the common rooms, even in potions when Snape turned to write on the board, students whispered and speculated. The boys debated which girl was the prettiest. Cho Chang from Ravenclaw, Angelina Johnson from Gryffindor, a few Hufflepuff girls. But among the hottest topics was Fleur Delacour from Beauxbatons. Did you see the way she took off her scarf that day? Someone murmured. Silver hair, pale eyes, she looks like a painting. I heard she's part Vila. No wonder every boy goes weak-kneed around her. Who'll get to be her date? The question fell over the crowd, then wild speculation began. Surely someone from our school. After all, it's Hogwarts ball. Not necessarily. Crumb from Durmstrang is famous. Crumb, which girl would choose him? He's a celebrity. Being famous doesn't mean anything. Fleur doesn't play Quidditch. The arguments grew heated, and a few mischief makers egged friends on to try asking Fleur. Why don't you go ask her? I'm not going. You go. I'm just giving you a chance. Get lost. Mostly it was talk. No one actually went until that afternoon when the hall swelled with people. Fleur drifted through a ring of admirers, answering questions with a smile. Students hung on her every movement, some openly admiring, some pretending to be passing, a few boys shoving for a better view. Then a red-haired figure forced his way through the crowd and came to a stop before her. All heads turned. He drew a breath. Miss Delacour, would you like to go to the Yule Ball with me? Ron's voice rang out. He stood there, face flaming, eyes fixed on Fleur. For a moment the hall was so silent you could hear a pin drop. People gaped with open mouths. Fred and George at the edge of the crowd looked as if they'd seen a ghost. Fred's mouth in a perfect O, George's eyes nearly popping from his head. The two exchanged a look. Who'd convinced their dim little brother to do this? Whispers rose. Is he serious? What does he think he's doing? Courageous, that's for sure. I think he's going down in history today. Fleur's reply was polite but cool. I'm sorry. She gave a small curtsy and turned away. Ron froze then, realizing what had just happened, fled the hall as fast as he could. Laughter rolled through the room. The story of Ron's failed proposal spread, and Draco Malfoy, ever ready to sneer, summed it up perfectly. A toad lusting after a swan. Meanwhile, in the Hufflepuff dormitory, Lynn lay awake worrying about the ball. Chapter 251. Who's outside? Lynn was roused that morning by a faint rustling. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, like something was being rubbed, torn, and opened over and over. He frowned, rolled over, and tried to block it out. Without success. He pulled the quilt over half his head, still to no avail. Finally, he gave up and threw the covers off. He froze. His three roommates were clustered around a huge mound in the middle of the dormitory, a mountain of parcels. Packages of every size, color, and wrapping were piled from the floor almost to the ceiling, the top ones wobbling as if ready to fall. Worse, the mound had spilled into the doorway, completely blocking it. Every now and then an owl flew in with another package and dropped it onto the pile. Have I slept that long? Lynn's eyes went wide. Is it already Christmas? His shout echoed through the room, startling the three busy hands. Edgar held an opened box that gave off a cloying, sweet scent. He turned to Lynn with a look that said, "You wish." Unfortunately, he said with a smirk, it's not Christmas yet. You've still got to find a dance partner, and you still have to keep hiding from people. Lynn ignored the teasing and stared at the mountain of parcels. Then, what's all this? He pointed at the pile that blocked the door. William pushed his glasses up, plucked a package from the very top, and deftly tore off the paper. He pulled out a pale pink envelope that smelled faintly of roses and shook it. They're all invitations asking you to be their dance partner. Since this morning, William went on, the owls haven't stopped. One after another, flying in, dropping packages. The three of us have been unwrapping them since 6. Up to now, he gestured at a stack of envelopes beside him taller than he was. Close to 100, I reckon. Edgar grinned. Sk, quite the ladies' man. And we're not done. Look at the pile by the door. That's the tip of the iceberg. Once we clear this, the numbers could double. Ollie, who hardly ever spoke, simply said, I've counted. 97. Edgar's eyes popped. You actually counted? Ollie ignored him and bent his head to unwrap another parcel. Lynn felt a pulse of a headache behind his eyes. What on earth was going on? He sighed, sat up, and started dressing. You guys keep unwrapping. I'm going fishing. Do. Before he could finish, a hand shot out and grabbed the back of his collar. Edgar leaned in, face inches away. You hiding out by yourself is one thing, he said, but making us do all this unwrapping for you, not very fair, brother. Lynn stayed still, expression frozen. Are you trying to run away? Edgar asked. No, Lynn said without changing his face. I just wanted some fresh air. It's -5 outside. The Black Lake's frozen. I'll dress warm. You're in pajamas. Lynn looked down at the thin pajamas and fell silent. 3 seconds later, he sighed and sat back on the bed. All right then. So the four of them sat around the mountain of packages and kept unwrapping. Edgar was the fastest. Rip, toss, muttering as he went. Invitation, invitation, snacks and sweets. Huh? What's this? He picked up an exquisitely wrapped little box, opened it, and inside was a tempting mini cake, dusted with golden frosting and smelling rich and sweet. Is this edible? He asked Lynn. It smells amazing. Lynn took it, sniffed, and gave Edgar a look that said he was being ridiculous. You should have studied more instead of slacking off, he said flatly. Edgar blinked. What's wrong? Is there something wrong with it? William leaned over, sniffed the cake carefully, and adjusted his glasses. Could the scent you're smelling be amortentia? A love potion? Edgar's face went pale. Love potion? He repeated, unsettled. Ollie didn't bother to look up. Amortentia. Lynn patted Edgar's shoulder. Don't worry, I have the antidote for amortentia. You can eat it. Really? Would I lie to you? By the time they finished, it was already noon. Lynn stretched and cracked his joints, then looked out the window. The sun was shining, the snow had stopped, and the sky was a clear, pale blue. He remembered he needed to eat. The thought conjured a flash of the great hall from 2 days ago. Witches clustered around him with burning gazes, envelopes pressed into his hands, the same insistent, Mr. Lynn, do you have a dance partner yet? He shuddered. No way was he going back there. The great hall was a trap now. He wouldn't go in. He looked for another option. Hagrid's hut would be perfect. Warm, food, and no crazy witches. He could also pick up some Abraxan tail hairs. The ones he'd taken from the Beauxbatons horses last time were almost gone, and he needed to restock. Doo-doo. With a soft pop, Doo-doo appeared beside him. Take Mowsy and go to Hagrid's hut, Lynn instructed. Another pop, and the two of them vanished. A moment later, his feet hit the snowy ground outside Hagrid's door. Everything was quiet, except for the wind rustling the treetops. Smoke curled from the hut's chimney, and a warm yellow light spilled from the windows. Cozy. Lynn stepped toward the door, then froze. Music came from inside, odd like a waltz but with an erratic tempo, sometimes speeding up, sometimes slowing, and occasionally hitting a sour note. Underneath the music were loud footsteps and the dull thumps of something bumping into furniture. Thump! Crash! Bumped into it again. Hagrid's voice called, tinged with annoyance. Lynn stood there, bewildered. Hagrid, dancing? His mind blanked for 3 seconds, then started racing. Does Hagrid have a girlfriend? Since when? Madame Maxime? No, it couldn't be. Hagrid stammers around her. Could she be the one? The thought grew increasingly plausible. Should he knock? What if he barged in on something he shouldn't see? He shivered and decided to leave. Then a burst of barking shattered the quiet. Woof, woof, woof! Fang came tearing around the corner of the hut, legs scrambling through the snow, tail wagging like a propeller, barking with the joy of a long-awaited reunion. Lynn watched him for a beat, then glanced at the closed door, a corner of his mouth twitching. Inside, the music stopped. Hagrid's voice followed, edged with a hint of panic. Who's outside? Chapter 252. That's not what I meant, all right then. There was no getting out of it, so Lynn raised his hand and knocked. Knock, knock, knock. Hagrid, it's me, Lynn. I'm here to freeload a meal. Silence answered for 2 seconds, then rustling, as if something was being frantically tidied. Heavy footsteps approached. Creak. The door flew open. Hagrid's huge form filled the frame. His face was flushed, not from the cold, but from being caught. His hair was messier than usual, his clothes creased, sweat beading at his temples. Most striking of all were his feet. He was wearing a pair of oversized leather shoes, their soles dusted with white ash from who knew where. Lynn, Hagrid stammered. Why are you here? You didn't even tell me you were coming. Lynn's eyes flicked from Hagrid's face to his feet and back. Came to freeload a meal, he said. And to check on the Abraxans. Is this a bad time? No. Very convenient. Hagrid backed up and stepped aside. Come in. It's freezing out. Lynn stepped into the cabin. It was messier than he'd imagined. The table had been shoved against the wall, chairs lay overturned, and there were crooked footprints across the floor. Exactly the sort made by those enormous leather shoes. In the corner, an old gramophone turned slowly, the needle hissing on the record. Lynn's gaze swept the room, then settled on Hagrid, who was awkwardly trying to right a chair, and, in his hurry, knocked another over. That, Hagrid stammered. I was just cleaning. Yes, cleaning. Lynn said nothing. His look plainly read, I don't buy it. Hagrid's face darkened with embarrassment. Hagrid, Lynn asked, are you practicing dancing? Hagrid froze like a statue, beet red. He blurted, of course not. I mean, how could I? It's just, the more he spoke, the more tangled he became, until he fell silent. Lynn strolled over to a relatively intact chair, sat, crossed one leg over the other, and folded his arms. Are you planning to ask Madame Maxime to the Yule Ball? Hagrid's eyes went wide. How did you? Just a guess, Lynn said. At the last feast, the way you looked at her, like Fang looking at a bone. Hagrid had no reply. Lynn laughed at Hagrid's expression and casually glanced around the cabin. By the way, he said, where are your blast-ended scroots? I didn't see them this time. Hagrid scratched his head. Well, he faltered. Madame Maxime came to see the Abraxans a few days ago, and she sat inside for a bit. And then she saw the scroots. Hagrid's face flushed again. She didn't like them, said they were ugly and frightening, and they kept spitting fire. It would be a bother if they burned her Abraxans. Lynn, Hagrid went on. I thought about it, and she had a point. Those scroots aren't proper to keep near the stables. So, I released them into the Forbidden Forest. Lynn's eyes widened. Released? Blast-ended scroots? Forbidden Forest? Together, those words sounded like a disaster brewing. Hagrid, Lynn's voice tightened. How many did you release? About 40 or 50. Lynn fell silent. He felt a pang of grief for whatever would happen in the forest. Blast-ended scroots bred fast, ate anything, and breathed fire. 40 or 50 loose at once could change an ecosystem before anyone noticed. Then, a mischievous idea struck him, and he looked up at Hagrid with a meaningful smile. Hagrid, he said, let me show you something. Hagrid blinked. What thing? Without answering, Lynn produced his 17 and tapped it against his temple. Hagrid's brow furrowed in confusion. He'd seen Lynn do this before, during the first task when Lynn had pulled a silvery white mass from his head and made a map. This time, though, what floated from Lynn's temple wasn't a map. It was a scene. In the scene, Hagrid's expression was utterly disdainful. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Madame Maxime, my foot, as in chapter 23. Stop, 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 Hagrid suddenly shouted. Lynn, what do you want to eat? I'll make anything. I'll go right now. Lynn smiled and slid the 7 back into his pocket. He spun it between his fingers a moment before tucking it away. Just something simple, he said easily. I'm not picky. Hagrid glared at him, eyes saying, You're only making fun of me. Lynn pretended not to notice, leaned back, and watched Hagrid clumsily shuffle toward the kitchen area, a large stove in the corner. Fang patted over, rubbed against Lynn's leg, and whimpered ingratiatingly. Lynn scratched the dog's head. It felt good. After lunch, Lynn lingered a while, chatting with Hagrid about the ball and offering encouragement. Just ask her out, Lynn urged, patting Hagrid's arm. If she refuses, it's not like you'll lose a limb. Hagrid still looked torn, but less miserable. I'll think about it, he mumbled, scratching his head. Seeing there was nothing more to say, Lynn rose. All right, I'm off to check on the Abraxans. Keep practicing your dancing, and try not to keep bumping into furniture. Hagrid's face flushed again as Lynn opened the door and stepped into the crisp air. Sunlight glittered off the snow. He crunched through the drifts toward the edge of the Forbidden Forest and stopped when he saw the stable. Hagrid's stable was lavish, more like a lodge than a barn. It was a wooden structure 3 times the size of the cabin, with a thickly thatched roof and log walls stuffed with some soft material. On closer inspection, Lynn found the stuffing was hair from various magical creatures, unicorn tail hair, thestral manes, even tufts clearly taken from Beauxbaton's Abraxans. He pushed the stable door open. It was warmer inside than he'd expected. The air was full of malt and fresh hay, with a faint alcoholic tang. The Abraxans had their heads in the trough, guzzling something down. Lynn leaned in for a look. 0, and it was on tap. Several large wooden barrels sat beside the trough, labeled Hagrid's Special Brew, pure malt whiskey. Next to them were piles of hay, not ordinary feed, but special rations mixed with rare herbs, giving off a rich, layered scent. Lynn watched, struck. Unlimited whiskey, special herbal feed, a luxurious stable lined with magical creature hair. He suddenly felt guilty thinking of Lumiere. Ahem! Not a single Abraxan looked up. They continued to eat and drink, eyes closed, oblivious. Fine. Lynn produced a bottle from his pocket and uncorked it. The rich scent of alcohol spread immediately. It was the stash he'd hidden in his nine mousy. The Abraxans froze. They lifted their heads, nostrils quivering, eyes locked on the bottle. Lynn smiled and shook it. "All right, a sip for everyone," he said, "and remember to give me some tail hair after you drink." They surged forward, clustering around him, bright, eager eyes focused on the bottle. The lead horse tasted a cautious sip and blinked in delight. Seeing that, the others grew impatient and pushed and shoved to get closer. Lynn controlled the pace, giving each horse a tiny sip and patting their necks. "Don't rush. There's enough for everyone." Once they'd had their fill, some offered their tails of their own accord. Lynn plucked small tufts with practiced fingers and tucked them into his personal bag. Good horse, next one." The stable rang with contented snorts and the soft rustle of Lynn gathering materials. His smile widened. His bag was bulging after several rounds. He stroked the mane of the last mare, pleased with the haul, when a thought hit him. "By the way," he asked the mare, "do you have a boyfriend?" Drunk on fine spirits, the mare froze. She turned her head slowly toward Lynn, with an expression that read pure horror. Lynn blinked, then realized how that must have sounded. No, he waved his hands. "I didn't mean it like that. I mean, my Abraxan, I have one too. He's a male." He fumbled for his levum and opened his photo album, holding the screen up to the mare. "Look, this is mine. His name's Lumiere. Not bad, right?" On the screen, Lumiere lay on his back in grass with several empty bottles scattered around him, belly up and clearly drunk, a blissed-out hazy expression on his face. The mare stared. Lynn stared. Great. Why did it have to be that picture? He fumbled to swipe to the next one. "Lynn, what are you doing?" Lynn looked up to see Fleur leading Gabrielle toward the stable entrance. He hadn't noticed when they'd arrived. "Good afternoon, Miss Delacour," he said first, a harmless smile on his face. "Good afternoon, Lynn." Fleur nodded, her eyes sweeping over the Abraxans clustered around him and then lingering on the bottle in his hand that he hadn't had time to put away. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," Lynn said, keeping his expression even. "I just came to see the Abraxans, brought them some drinks while I was at it." He did not mention the half a bag of tail hair in his pocket. What else could he say? Tell Fleur he'd taken a liking to her Beauxbatons Abraxans and wanted to steal one to be a companion for his drunken horse at home. The picture was too ridiculous to entertain. Fleur regarded him with a faintly searching look. After a moment, she said, "Madame Maxime is very fond of these Abraxans. You shouldn't be plucking their hair so much." Lynn's smile tightened for a split second. "I didn't pluck any." Fleur said nothing. Lynn blinked. Fine. He nodded as if he understood, while his mind raced through how he might spirit one away without anyone noticing. Asking outright was impossible. Madame Maxime would never allow it. Sneaking one out was unthinkable with Fleur standing there. Lumiere? Lynn imagined the perpetually tipsy housemate trying to charm a mare and decided no, he didn't want to risk being embarrassingly rejected on top of everything else. He shoved such thoughts aside and changed the subject. "Miss Delacour, why are you here?" Fleur's face flickered. She opened her mouth as if to answer, then hesitated. Gabrielle, beside her, looked from Lynn to Fleur with a smug little expression like she knew something. "Sister," she said in a clear voice, "didn't we come here to hide from?" Fleur was quicker and clapped a hand over Gabrielle's mouth. Gabrielle made muffled sounds and waved her small hands. Lynn raised an eyebrow. "Hide? From what?" He thought for a moment, then a realization dawned. "You're here for some peace and quiet," he said. Fleur paused, then took her hand away from Gabrielle's mouth and stared at Lynn in surprise. "Also," she repeated, "weren't you just saying you came to see the Abraxans?" Lynn didn't flush or fluster. His lie was exposed, and he met it with breezy indifference. "Don't worry about the details," he waved. Fleur fell silent, thinking he was thick-skinned. On the other hand, this was the champion who'd fought a Frostwing dragon alone. A stubbornness of that kind wasn't surprising. Her eyes brightened as an idea formed. If she could get someone like him on her side for the upcoming tasks. Ahem. She cleared her throat and put on a proper expression. "Lynn, don't you have a dance partner yet?" The question was sudden. Lynn reacted fast, rubbing his chin instead of answering directly. Fleur felt a little unnerved under his gaze, but forced herself on. "You only need," she began. "If there are conditions, then no deal," Lynn cut in crisply. Fleur's sentence died. He spread his hands in a mock innocent shrug. "You're clearly trying to negotiate. I'm not stupid." Fleur bristled, but forced herself to think tactically. Trick him now, secure his agreement. She could worry about the later tasks later. "Then if I have no requirements," she said, testing. Lynn blinked. "Then it can be considered," he said in a more serious tone. "After all, you are a beauty." Fleur's mouth moved, then closed. How was he so infuriatingly difficult? She inhaled, controlled herself, and asked, "So do you agree or not?" Lynn rubbed his chin and shot back, "So do you have any requirements?" Fleur grit her teeth, decided to get the agreement first, and lied, "I have no requirements." "Oh," Lynn said, "then I agree." The next morning, promptly at 10, Lynn stood at the entrance to the Great Hall. Edgar Burns, William Smith, and Ollie Thorne followed, each wearing a different expression. Edgar, with an eager grin, waiting for the show, William pushing his glasses up as if nonchalant, and Ollie reserved but with the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. Lynn took a breath and grasped the Great Hall door handle. The door creaked open. Professor McGonagall had clearly prepared well. The long house tables were pushed to the sides and lined against the walls. In their place, rows of chairs formed a large semicircle, leaving a wide open space in the middle. Ribbons and magical light globes hung from the ceiling, bathing the hall in a soft glow. A gramophone played a gentle waltz low enough to set the mood without drowning conversation. Students from all years filled many of the chairs. Girls clustered in whispering groups, boys scattered and stealing glances, and representatives from the other schools dotted the room. Beauxbaton's girls by the window, a few Durmstrang boys looking solemn, and pupils from Ilvermorny, Ouagadougou, and Castello Bruxo scattered throughout. Lynn's eyes passed over familiar faces as he stepped in. "Stop standing there," Edgar nudged him. "Go in, champion." Lynn moved, drawing a few curious looks from nearby girls, then found a less crowded corner and sat. Edgar and the others took the seats beside him. "Nervous?" Edgar murmured. Lynn glanced at him. "What do you think?" "I think your face has gone white." "That's the lighting," Lynn said. Edgar looked unconvinced. Lynn ignored him and watched the center of the floor where Professor McGonagall now stood, robes deep green and hair pinned tight. She cleared her throat and the room quieted. "Good morning," she said clearly. "Welcome, everyone, to this dance practice. I know that dancing may not come easily to many of you." Her gaze swept the hall and paused on Lynn for less than a second. A shiver ran down his spine. "But the Yule Ball is a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament, and I do not wish to see any student, especially the champions, make a fool of themselves at the ball." She tapped her wand lightly. "Therefore, today we will start with the basics. I will demonstrate, and then you will practice in pairs." Her stare fell again on Lynn. "Mr. Lynn." He froze. Slowly he met her eyes. "Come up and be my demonstration partner." Lynn stared. Every head in the room turned toward him in unison. He drew a breath and walked to the center. "Stand here," Professor McGonagall instructed, pointing to a square marked on the floor. He obeyed, and they stood facing each other, less than a meter apart. She extended her hand. "Place your hand here." She guided his left hand to her shoulder and took his other hand in her right. "Hold the other hand like this." "Very good," she said. "Now listen. I will count to 3, and we will step together. 1, 2, 3. Lynn moved, stepping forward with his left foot as she'd indicated. Then, thud. His right foot landed square on Professor McGonagall's left foot. The hall went silent. He felt the pressure under his shoe and looked down to confirm it was indeed her foot. He looked up into McGonagall's face. She showed no sign of annoyance. "It's all right," she said, as if nothing had happened. "It's always like this the first time." Again. 1, 2, 3. He tried again. This time his right foot missed, but as he turned his left foot, came down directly on Professor McGonagall's right foot. Thud. Her expression never changed, but he could see the corner of her eye twitch. Suppressed laughter rippled through the hall. Edgar was already doubled over, shoulders shaking. William and Ollie were barely holding it together. "Again," Professor McGonagall said calmly. Lynn concentrated, every muscle careful. Step, turn, step, and his foot landed on her again. This time, Professor McGonagall's body stiffened for the fraction of a second. The hall fell deathly quiet. Then, "Ah!" Edgar exploded first, and the rest followed in a wave of uncontrollable laughter. Lynn stood there with his foot still on the professor's, mortified. Even with his little tricks, Professor McGonagall had skipped any gentle instruction and gone straight to practice. He could feel her face darken in those 10 seconds. He quickly lifted his foot and stepped back. "I'm sorry, Professor," he muttered. "It's all right," she said. "Go over there and watch for now. Someone else come up." It felt like being pardoned by a monarch. He turned to leave as Edgar choked with laughter, tears in his eyes. "Lynn," Edgar managed between guffaws, "you are amazing. 10 seconds. Stepped 3 times." Lynn sat back down expressionless. He did not need to guess. For a long time to come, this was going to be his greatest dark history. Chapter 254, Snape's Love Letters. After the dance ended, Lynn's life returned to its usual calm. The reason was simple. The rumor that he'd been Fleur Delacour's dance partner had spread through Hogwarts like wildfire. Nobody knew who had started it. Maybe a student had passed the Abraxan stables that day, maybe a Beauxbatons girl had seen them leave together, or maybe little Gabrielle had let it slip. Whatever the source, once the story was out, people treated Lynn differently. The sudden, ambush-style invitations stopped. The looks in the corridors shifted from, "Is he looking at me? Do I have a chance?" to a more complicated, "He actually pulled it off." Whispered comments followed. "Have you heard? Lynn's partner was Fleur Delacour." "No way." "Yes, someone saw them by the Abraxan stables." "Merlin, how did he manage that?" "Beats me. It certainly wasn't because of his looks." Lynn's mouth twitched at the last remark. He decided not to argue. He didn't bother to correct anyone. When Edgar asked him outright one afternoon, Lynn was reading and only glanced up to say, "Yeah." Edgar stared for 3 full seconds and then exploded. "No, on what grounds?" he demanded, flailing. "That's Fleur Delacour. Every boy at school would kill for that." Lynn looked at him calmly. "What are you trying to say?" Edgar leaned in, sizing him up. "You're average-looking, and your personality, sinister, scheming, always full of bad ideas. You make people uncomfortable when you talk. How on earth did you get her to agree?" Lynn considered the question and answered seriously. "She asked me to be her partner. I said no special requests. She said none. I said okay." Edgar had no reply. Days slipped by and Christmas drew near. Potion class arrived, and Professor Snape was, as usual, in a foul mood. Lynn's cauldron gave off a single wisp of smoke. Snape decided shouldn't be there. 10 points gone. Edgar cut a blade of grass wrong. 5 points. William Smith added 2 extra sentences when asking a question. 10 points. Even Ollie, who was as quiet as a mouse, lost 5 points. Brewing potions with a blank expression is a desecration of the noble art of potions, Snape declared, in case anyone wondered. Lynn nearly laughed. He held it in, but Snape saw his mouth twitch, and because Snape was not a forgiving man, another 5 points were taken away. Slandering a teacher's facial expression management, Snape pronounced, inventing a new crime on the spot. Lynn left class simmering and thinking of revenge. As he walked down the corridor in his "don't come near me" mood, he nearly bumped into a familiar figure hunched at a corner, Harry Potter. Harry stood with his hands clasped behind his back, fingers white around a crumpled envelope, sweating as though preparing for an exam. He was staring down the corridor at Cho Chang, who stood a little way off. Cho Chang?" Harry's voice trembled. "Could I have a word?" Cho smiled politely. "Of course. What is it?" Harry's ears reddened. He pulled the envelope out and, voice shrinking, blurted out, "Would you go to the ball with me?" Lynn's eyes widened. He watched, stunned. Part of him wanted to mourn for Cedric. Part of him wanted to light a candle for Harry's audacity. Cho's smile froze. She looked at Harry with an apologetic expression. "I'm so sorry. Harry, I already asked Cedric." Harry's face went as red as his scarf, ears burning. When did you?" he stammered. Cho explained politely, "The day Professor Dumbledore announced the Yule Ball." Lynn swore he heard something break, some private thing inside Harry. Harry stammered, It's okay. I was just asking. I have to go. Bye," and ran, his speed instant and astonishing. In a flash, he had rounded the stairwell and vanished. Cho stood quietly looking the way Harry had gone, then murmured, "I'm really sorry." Lynn moved toward where Harry had been and spotted the crumpled envelope on the floor. He picked it up, looked at it, then at Cho. She flushed a little. That Harry, I know, Lynn said with an easy wave. No need to explain. I didn't see anything. He slipped the envelope into his pocket, nodded, and went on his way. As he walked, his eyes flicked here and there and an idea formed. The next day in potions, the classroom smelled of herbs and simmering mixtures. Students bent over their cauldrons as Snape paced between the rows, his black robes trailing and his gaze sharp as knives. Lynn sat at his table, a pot of oddly colored potion hissing before him, but he kept glancing toward the window. An owl was coming in. It flew straight through the open window, circled once, and dropped a red envelope at Lynn's feet. A howler. Every head turned. Lynn looked surprised in the exact way an actor would. Snape halted mid-step, eyes following the envelope to Lynn. The corner of Snape's mouth twitched. Don't move, Lynn, he said, cold. Snape strode over and stared down at the red letter. Let's hear the new content, he drawled. I imagine this must be from some poor girl whose heart you've utterly broken. A few suppressed snickers rippled through the room. Lynn's face went perfectly horrified. Snape's smile widened, and he bent to tap the envelope with his wand. The moment the wand touched it, the paper unfolded, and a loud, magically amplified voice filled the classroom. Dear Professor Snape, it began, clear and earnest. The students fell silent. Snape's hand froze. The voice continued, pristine and crude at the same time. I am a first-year Gryffindor. I was captivated from the first moment I attended potions. Your greasy black hair, your deep voice, your eyes full of wisdom. You are the one in my heart. Enough, Snape snapped. He flicked his wand in a violent arc. The howler turned to a burst of flame and burned to ashes in midair. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. The students stared from the smoldering ash to Snape's heaving chest. He glared at Lynn. Professor, it isn't me, Lynn said, blinking innocently. I have no idea who sent it. 5 seconds of silence passed like an hour. Then Snape exploded. Get out of my classroom! Lynn rose and left without another word. At the door he turned, raised his hand in a casual wave at his stunned classmates, and walked away. 255. Chapter 255. She will compensate you for your losses. The number of students staying at Hogwarts for this year's Christmas holiday set a record since the school's founding. It wasn't an exaggeration. In past years, the castle would be practically empty at this time. The few people you might run into in the corridors could be counted on one hand. The ones who stayed were usually those too far from home to bother going back, or who had some particular reason. This year was different. The pile of applications to stay was thick enough to crush someone. The reason was simple: the Yule Ball. A traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament, it was a once-in-a-century kind of event. With teachers and students from the whole school, plus guests from 2 other schools, and supposed attendance from ministry officials who would want to miss it. Take Edgar and the other 2, William and Ollie, who had always gone home for Christmas before. Edgar's parents had messaged early asking whether he was coming back. His reply was grandiose. As a member of Hufflepuff, your son feels deeply obligated to remain at school during this important moment of international exchange to contribute his meager strength to enhancing the friendship of the global wizarding community. Lynn had almost spat out his breakfast when he read it. You call this contributing meager strength? He asked, pointing at the message. That's an 800-word way of saying, I want to stay for the ball. Edgar straightened his back. So what? I'm doing it to sound cultured. William pushed up his glasses. Sounding cultured and actually being cultured are not the same thing. Edgar scowled. Ollie said nothing at all. He simply sent a brief message to his father. I'm not coming home. As for why the boys were staying, Lynn didn't have to guess. They were here to accompany their dates while picking out gowns. Edgar's date was a Ravenclaw girl with brown hair and round-rimmed glasses who spoke softly and looked like she could live in the library. Edgar kept stressing, she likes reading. We have a lot in common. Lynn couldn't help himself. How many books have you actually read? Edgar went quiet and changed the subject. William's date was a Gryffindor with short red hair and a smile that flashed white teeth, a don't mess with me sort of person. Her most notable trait was that she didn't like reading. When William introduced her, he said, she has a very cheerful personality. How did you two meet? Lynn asked. William pushed up his glasses again. She asked to borrow a pen from me in the library. And then, William considered, then she lost my notes. Lynn fell silent. William, however, didn't seem to mind. Whether he genuinely didn't care or was enchanted by her in some other way was anyone's guess. Ollie's date was the most unlikely match of all. A Slytherin witch with black hair and big, expressive eyes, chatty and bubbly, the exact opposite of Ollie. Seeing them together the first time, Lynn had thought his eyes were playing tricks. One taciturn, one nonstop talker. The three pairs were wildly different in style, but they had one common trait. The whole process of choosing gowns was soul-destroying. The boutique in Hogsmeade specialized in evening gowns. The storefront was modest, but the dresses in the window were clearly expensive, dark wool with precise tailoring, delicate embroidery, and satins that caught the light with a soft sheen. Every piece screamed, costly. Lynn and the others sat on a bench in a corner of the shop. Each held several shopping bags, gowns their dates had tried on and were considering. Lynn stared at the pile in his lap, then at the growing stacks in the other's hands, and sighed. "I've heard shopping is tiring," he said, exhausted, "but I didn't expect this kind of exhaustion. Not physically, mentally." Edgar nodded earnestly, then his face changed so fast Lynn wondered if he'd been enchanted. In less than a blink, he went from drained to radiant. "What do you mean mentally exhausted?" he demanded, suddenly animated. "I don't feel anything of the sort. How can you say accompanying your date to buy gowns is tiring? It's an honor, a delight, a duty every Hufflepuff should fulfill." Lynn rolled his eyes. He glanced where Edgar was looking and froze. Fleur stood in the doorway of the changing rooms, having finished dressing. She wore a silver blue gown that seemed woven from moonlight. The fabric moved with her, soft and flowing. The collar and cuffs bore delicate embroidery that shimmered under the lights. Her long silver hair was let down, loosely gathered at the back with a slim ribbon, a few strands framing her face. She let her gaze sweep over them and finally landed on Lynn. Lynn looked her up and down, then gave a sincere thumbs up. "Hey," he said plainly, "you're even more beautiful, all dressed up." Fleur blinked, then rolled her eyes. "The way you compliment people always sounds so irritating," she said. "I'm being sincere," Lynn protested. Fleur didn't argue. She came over and sat beside him. "Are you guys done picking?" she asked. She said with a nod. "What about you?" Lynn shook the bags in his hands. "Helping them. I bought mine ages ago." Fleur glanced at the bags and at the three witches still flitting around the mirrors, a small smile on her lips. "So you're just waiting here?" Lynn gave a rueful sigh. "What else? Go in and help pick." Fleur pictured that and couldn't help laughing. That would be inappropriate. They sat side by side, watching the three girls spin in front of mirrors and occasionally offering comments. Edgar and the others stood nearby under the weight of more and more bags, looking progressively more numb. Lynn broke the silence. "Where's your sister?" "Gabrielle?" Fleur answered. "She's with the Beauxbatons group. Madame Maxime is keeping an eye on her." They lapsed into quiet again. Fleur turned to him suddenly. "Don't you want to ask why I chose you as my date?" she asked. Lynn thought a moment, then shrugged. "Wasn't it because you said you had no requirements?" Fleur choked on the question for a second and glared at him helplessly. Lynn couldn't help laughing. "All right," he said. "I know you must have your reasons. But since you said there were no requirements, I won't pry. It's just a dance. I won't be losing any limbs." Fleur was silent for a long beat, then spoke quietly. "Thank you." "Don't make it so formal," Lynn said with a dismissive wave. "It's unsettling." Fleur clenched her hands at her sides, the fingers strained, but she kept a polite smile, telling herself over and over, "Don't get angry, for the glory of Beauxbatons." Lynn watched her and teased, "You're not angry? No way? Really?" "Lynn!" Her shout split the air. The change was instantaneous. The polite smile dropped, her eyes flashed, and the air seemed to hum. The Vila temperament that's easy to charm could also flare like heat. In a heartbeat, she was on her feet and striding toward the counter, voice sharp enough to make heads turn. The scene escalated quickly. A stray display stand wobbled, a hanger was knocked down, a mirror was narrowly missed. Fleur's indignation flowed out as a fierce torrent. Then, as quickly as it had come, it was swallowed by panic. Her cheeks flushed, her hands fluttered, and she was suddenly profuse with apologies. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Fleur babbled, rushing to tidy up the knocked-over items and reset the knocked hanging gowns. I'll compensate you for any damage. I will pay for whatever was broken. I'm sorry, one of her companions echoed, bowing low and echoing the apology. She will compensate you for your losses. The shop owner, blinking speechless, looked at the trio of apologizers and at the scattered dresses and then simply stood there, stunned. Chapter 256. Hallelujah. The night before Christmas, a heavy snow settled over the castle, fitting for the season. Flakes drifted down, covering the spires and sweeping across the grounds. The treetops of the forbidden forest were weighed down with white, silvering beneath the moon. A sheet of ice had formed over the black lake, reflecting the warm yellow light from the windows. Even the Durmstrang ship was frozen where it drifted, wedged in the middle of the lake by a thick ring of ice, icicles hanging from its gunwales. Oddly, the windows of the three champions' cabins, Krum's, Louis', and Katya's, were all open that night. According to an anonymous Durmstrang student, wind and snow howled inside until a deep layer of snow had collected in the rooms and their bedding had frozen into blocks of ice. The next morning, Lynn was roused again by the rustle of wrapping paper. He opened his eyes to find Edgar, William, and Ollie already sitting around a mountain of packages. Only this time, they weren't invitations, but proper Christmas presents. Boxes, bags, and parcels of every size, piled higher than before. Several exquisite gift boxes held custom-made 5. Lynn rubbed his eyes and sat up, ignoring the 5 and plunging his hands into the pile, flipping one box, then 2, 3, 4. Edgar set down a sculpture shaped like a lalev and watched him. Lynn, what are you looking for? Nothing, Lynn lied, not looking up. Nothing. Edgar raised an eyebrow. And yet you're searching so seriously? Lynn kept digging. After a little longer, he stopped and muttered, Strange, I don't see any gifts from the Durmstrang champions. I even saw Fleur's present. Edgar and the others froze and glanced at one another. Then, pfft. Edgar couldn't hold it in and burst out laughing. You tormented those Durmstrang champions so badly and still expect them to give you Christmas gifts? Lynn looked up with the most innocent expression he could manage. What did I do? Edgar counted on his fingers. In the first task, you collided with Krum and cracked his ribs. Then you chased them for 2 whole days and nights. And now you want their gifts? Lynn blinked. That just means they haven't learned their lesson. What? Edgar said. If they'd sent me gifts, it would mean they don't hold a grudge. Not holding a grudge is a good thing. It means they're broad-minded. Lynn's tone grew earnest. Since they didn't send any, it shows they're still resentful. Resentment means they haven't seen the light, which means I haven't done enough. He paused, a hint of satisfaction turning to regret. So last night, I specially went to open their windows for them, to help them clear their heads. Silence. William pushed his glasses up. You went on to the Durmstrang ship last night? Yeah. To open their windows? Yes. In a night that was 10 degrees below zero? What otherwise? It's too easy to get caught during the day. Edgar opened and closed his mouth a few times before he managed. You really aren't afraid of Karkaroff catching you? Lynn shrugged. He won't. I have experience. Time skimmed by. By 7 in the evening, the sky dimmed and warm light shone from the castle windows. The snow had stopped, but lay soft and white under the moon. Lynn carried a bucket back from the edge of the Black Lake, today's spoils of war, a handful of finger-long fish and shrimp. He'd cut a hole in the ice and fished the entire afternoon. No big catches, but enough. He set the bucket down in the dormitory corner and picked up the gift box that had arrived that morning. Inside was a white silk dress robe embroidered with golden cloud patterns. The fabric was soft and smooth, shimmering faintly. The collar and cuffs were edged with delicate golden cloudwork, the waist tailored perfectly, the cut clean and sharp. Lynn changed into it and checked his reflection. His hair was neatly combed. The robe sat as if it were custom-made, because it was. The white brightened him, the gold thread caught the light. He looked left, looked right, clicked his tongue and said to the mirror, "Still so handsome." At 7:30, he left the dormitory and headed for the Great Hall. Corridors bustled with students walking in pairs and groups. The girls wore 5 of many colors that sparkled under the enchanted lights, while most of the boys favored darker robes, a few breaking the pattern with bright garments that drew glances. Edgar and the others waited at the entrance, Edgar in a dark green robe, his hair slick and perfectly set, William in deep blue, pushing his glasses up, Ollie in a simple black robe. When Edgar saw Lynn, he did a quick once-over. "Merlin," he said, "whose thunder are you trying to steal?" "White with gold embroidery suits you," William added. Ollie grunted. "Not bad." Lynn nodded. "All good. Let's go." They pushed open the doors together. The great hall had been transformed. The long tables had been replaced by dozens of round ones. Christmas trees frosted with silver stood in the corners, decorated with tiny lights and golden stars. Ribbons crisscrossed the vaulted ceiling, some gold, some silver, and they drifted lazily under the effect of 28. Snowflakes fell from on high, not real snow, but a magical effect. Tiny white specks of light that swirled through the air, landed on shoulders and hair, and then vanished. The whole hall felt like a dream. Lynn stood, and, for once, didn't make a sarcastic remark. When Dumbledore stood, the hall quickly hushed. The old headmaster stood before the high table, his silver beard catching the glow of the magical snow. Today he wore a deep purple robe embroidered with golden stars and moons. Fawkes sat on his shoulder, his feathers warm and luminous. Dumbledore looked out over the crowd with a bright smile. "Before we eat," he suggested cheerily, "let us sing a Christmas carol together." A ragged chorus of agreement rose, mostly from Hogwarts students who were used to the headmaster's sudden whims. The visiting students exchanged glances but said nothing. With a wave of his wand, a golden ribbon unfurled above the tables. Lines of lyrics appeared on it in clear, shimmering handwriting so everyone could read. Only one line kept repeating, "Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah." Lynn stared at the line and fell silent. Dumbledore began to lead. His voice wasn't remarkable, but it was full of cheer. "Hallelujah, hallelujah," Fawkes cried from his perch in something that either accompanied the song or protested it. Professor McGonagall's face darkened instantly. Lynn saw her expression and almost laughed. Embarrassment at home is one thing, losing face internationally is another. Teachers and students from 6 schools, ministry officials, and guests from many countries were watching the headmaster of Hogwarts lead a chorus of "Hallelujah." The problem was that wizards from other schools didn't know the song. Madame Maxime kept a polite smile and moved her lips, but she made no sound. Her Beauxbaton students mimed along with dignity. On the Durmstrang side, Karkaroff's face was tight and drawn, his posture radiating a clear, "I will not be made to sing such childish things." The students behind him tried to follow, but hearing only the word "Hallelujah" could only open their mouths and produce vague syllables. An Ilvermorny boy attempted an operatic flourish and ended up wildly off-key. The girl beside him jabbed him in the ribs. A low debate rose from Ouagadougou as they argued the proper melody for the piece. Castellabruxo students gave up and clapped to the beat. Hogwarts, of course, had given itself over. From behind Lynn came a collage of sounds, high, low, off-key, tuneless, and some students making up the words as they went. Lynn mouthed the syllables now and then for the sake of participation. Edgar sang enthusiastically but carelessly. In the muddle, a strange sound caught Lynn's ear from his left rear, not the tune of Hallelujah, but another melody entirely. He listened closely. That was the melody of an Islamic nasheed. He turned his head but couldn't see through the crowd. The nasheed's lines wove quietly into the hall's chorus, and to Lynn's surprise, the two melodies blended oddly well. The song ended. Dumbledore nodded, pleased, his smile widening. "A very wonderful song," he said, full of festive joy. Polite applause followed. McGonagall's expression relaxed a little, more from resignation than relief, but the mood in the hall remained warm, if slightly dissonant. Chapter 257, Time to Get to Work. At past Hogwarts banquets, the food had always been laid out all at once along the long house tables, like a buffet, so students could help themselves. That system had its conveniences and its quirks. The convenience was obvious. Everything was on display at a glance. Roast turkey, roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, pumpkin pie, reach and take. The quirk was that there was no real choice. Most students only reached for the platters nearest their seats. Few would trek to the far end of the table for a particular dish. So it wasn't unusual for the roast lamb at the head of the table to be snapped up while a steaming pot of stew at the other end sat untouched. Lynn, of course, never let that stop him. If there wasn't enough to go around, he'd stand up and reach for distant platters, or bolt straight for another house's table if he had to. Tonight, however, the banquet had a different format. The long house tables had been moved to the walls and replaced by round tables scattered across the great hall. A few chairs were arranged around each, and students from different houses sat together instead of being segregated. Lynn and his friends took a round table by the window. Soon Fleur arrived with Gabrielle in tow. Fleur wore a silver-blue gown that shimmered softly under the glow of the enchanted snowflakes. Gabrielle followed behind her, wide-eyed and excited as she looked around. Fleur sat next to Lynn, Gabrielle close at her sister's side. Heads turned, gazes focused. Lynn didn't react. He glanced down at the table. There was no food, only elegant menus. Fine cards with gold-leafed edges and dish names written in an elaborate script lay in front of each place. Gabrielle waited, then peered at the table. Noticing no one moving, she tilted her head and whispered, "Why hasn't the banquet started yet?" Lynn frowned and studied his menu without looking up. White swallow falling snow. What's that? Azure dragon. Lying in the black lake. What even is that? He flipped through and found clearer items on the back. Strawberry stewed watermelon, chocolate braised squash, pineapple mixed with cucumber. He stared at the names and fell silent. Finally, he closed the menu and pushed it to the side. "I'm suddenly not very hungry," he said. Edgar laughed nearby. Lynn glanced at him, snatched the menu back, and pushed it toward Gabrielle. "Stop staring," he said, then added, "Order anything you want. Just say the name." Gabrielle leaned in and traced the list with her finger until she settled on 3 items. "This one," she said. "This one, and this one." Pop. 3 plates appeared out of thin air in front of her. A golden pudding dusted with powdered sugar, thin slices of ham glistening with oil, and a bright salad of mixed vegetables that looked fresh and delicious. Gabrielle's eyes lit up. Several nearby students stared. When the plates materialized, the attention grew obvious. Lynn looked around once. The gazes dropped away as if on cue. Menus were picked up across the hall. Orders rang out and plates began to appear on the round tables in succession. Fleur studied her menu for a moment and ordered a few dishes: corn tortillas, boiled potatoes, and a plate of leafy greens. Lynn glanced at the plate of leaves and at the other plain selections and couldn't help himself. "That's all you're eating?" he asked. Fleur nodded matter-of-factly. "Hogwarts food's too greasy." Lynn raised an eyebrow. Fleur continued, "I'm afraid if I keep eating, I won't fit into my dress." Lynn looked her up and down, thought a moment, and said, "Eat as much as you want." Fleur blinked. He added, "You're not going to get any taller, so a little extra weight won't change that." Fleur was silent for a beat, then smiled faintly. When the banquet wound down, Dumbledore rose again. He smoothed his napkin and walked to the front of the high table, eyes sweeping the great hall. The students looked up, food forgotten. Everyone knew the main event was about to begin. Dumbledore flicked his wand. The round tables rose and glided in unison toward the walls, lining up neatly. The chairs stacked themselves on top. The whole process was smooth as water. The newly cleared space at the center of the hall could easily hold 100 dancers. The polished floor reflected a warm, gentle light from the enchanted lamps. Dumbledore flicked his wand once more, and a raised stage at the east wall appeared as if conjured from the air. Dark wood with gold inlay gleamed under the lights. A drum kit sat ready, guitars lined up on stands, a lute, a cello, and an organ waited in place. Students murmured, guessing who'd be playing tonight. A cloud of colorful smoke burst on the stage, and when it cleared, figures stood among the instruments. The Weird Sisters. The great hall erupted into cheers and applause. Even Lynn raised an eyebrow. The band was one of the most famous in the wizarding world and notoriously difficult to book. Dumbledore had clearly spared no expense. Dumbledore, the Ministry of Magic, is reimbursing this. It doesn't hurt at all. The band members waved and picked up their instruments. The drummer tapped his sticks, the cellist tuned his strings, the organist pressed a few keys, then a smooth waltz flowed into the hall. The melody was elegant and soothing, suffused with a classical romance that wrapped the room in a dreamlike spell. The enchanted snowflakes continued to fall, settling on shoulders before dissolving. The ball began. By tradition, the first dance belonged to the champions. Lynn felt the attention focus on him. He turned to Fleur, reached out, and offered his hand. Come on, time to get to work. Fleur hesitated for a second, then placed her hand in his. Lynn led her to the center of the floor. People made a path without being asked. Edgar watched from the side and shook his head at William. He calls this work, he muttered. William pushed his glasses up. What else did you expect him to say? Edgar imitated a flowery tone. Dear Miss Delacour, would you do me the honor of this dance? Ollie, quiet until now, said mildly, That's not him. Edgar sighed. True. In the center of the floor, Lynn and Fleur took their positions. They stood facing each other, less than half a meter apart. Fleur's left hand rested on Lynn's shoulder. Her right hand was in his. Lynn's other hand settled at her waist, just the right distance, neither too intimate nor too distant. Fleur looked at him and asked in a low voice, You won't step on me, will you? Lynn considered it and answered solemnly, Hard to say. Fleur frowned. I'll try my best, he added, but I can't promise. Fleur breathed out and gave a resigned smile. Fine. If you step on me, you step on me. It's only one song. Lynn nodded. The music shifted and the waltz began. They moved together. Halfway through the first song, the dance floor was filling fast. Students who had been watching from the sidelines only moments before now flooded in with their partners. Boys and girls twirled and moved to the music. Hundreds of shoes clicked against the polished floor in a chaotic, rhythmic patter. The noises blended into a peculiar accompaniment to the orchestra. Magic snowflakes drifted down through the air, landing on hair and shoulders before vanishing without a trace. A space had been cleared in the center of the floor, reserved for the champions. By tradition, the champions remained in the spotlight until the first song ended, taking turns spinning in the middle while the whole hall stared. The three Hogwarts champions, Cedric with Cho Chang, Roger Davies with a Ravenclaw girl, and Harry with Parvati, had each completed a graceful rotation. Cedric and Cho moved in perfect harmony, their spins fluid enough to draw applause. Roger danced competently, at least avoiding major blunders. Harry was nervous, but Parvati guided him so well he made it through without anything disastrous. The Bobitz champions took their turn next. Fleur had already finished her first round and was now dancing a second time with Lynn. Chloe and Sophie floated across the floor looking elegant and poised. Then came the champions from Ouagadougou, Ilvermorny, and Castello Bruxo, each with their own distinct style and all dancing admirably. Finally, the Durmstrang champions entered together, Krum, Louis, and Katya. Lynn caught sight of them and burst out laughing. The three of them looked, well, entirely unique. White steam puffed from their nostrils in time with their steps, and faint smoke billowed from their ears. They looked like walking steam engines, obviously straight from Madame Pomfrey after taking a potion for colds, which, Lynn suspected with amusement, was thanks to him opening the windows for ventilation last night. Crum's face was ashen, whether from irritation or the potion's after effects, no one could tell. He tried to maintain a dignified expression, but the steady white puffs from his nose made that dignity hard to keep. Louis looked utterly resigned, moving through the steps with a kind of decadent, I-don't-care air as more steam escaped him. Katya fared worst of all. Not only did she puff steam from her nose and smoke from her ears, she sneezed occasionally. Each sneeze sent a larger cloud of mist curling over both her and her partner. The partners' expressions were all nearly identical, polite endurance. Hermione's expression was the most complicated. She wore a carefully chosen dress and had spent the entire afternoon pinning her hair into an elegant bun studded with tiny sparkling clips. Now Crum's steam kept sweeping directly onto that bun, loosening the clips and flattening the neat hair into a messy tangle. A stray lock had slipped free and stuck against the side of her face. She forced a polite smile and stole a breath, thinking that, had she known, she would never have accepted Crum's invitation. Lynn watched from the side, grinning. Fleur noticed his expression, followed his gaze, and then leaned over to whisper, "You did this?" Lynn blinked. "What?" Fleur gave him a pointed look. "Don't play dumb. I heard their windows were open all night and wouldn't close. Was that you?" Lynn wasn't about to admit it. He shrugged and resumed scanning the room for more moments of comic chaos. He didn't have to look far. The Durmstrang trio weren't the only ones struggling. William Smith was edging along the perimeter of the dance floor with a Gryffindor girl who looked increasingly frazzled. She kept frowning and stepping back, as if trying to avoid his feet. Every time William moved in time with the music, he somehow managed to plant his shoe squarely on hers. Once, twice, 3 times. She looked down at her delicate silver dance shoes, now marked with faint scuffs, then gave William a look that plainly asked, "Are you doing this on purpose?" William read the message loud and clear and opened his mouth to protest. He felt wronged. He wasn't Edgar Burns, simple-minded but blessed with a natural knack for the steps. William could recite complicated potion formulas backwards, but dancing? That was asking too much. He was following Professor McGonagall's taught footwork, yet somehow, every time he stepped, his partner's foot was in the exact spot he planned to land. How could he be blamed? The girl forced a tight smile. "It's fine," she said through her teeth. "Keep going." William nodded and continued. And then he did it again, the 4th stomp, and her expression completely collapsed. Not far away, Edgar was dancing his heart out with his Ravenclaw partner, making her laugh until she had to dab her eyes. Lynn spotted them and allowed William a moment of silent sympathy. 3 seconds, no more. It wasn't only the students. The teachers' dancing provided its own share of mishaps. Most conspicuous were Professor Flitwick and Madame Pomfrey. Madame Pomfrey had chosen a dark red dress that made her look both dignified and severe. Professor Flitwick stood on tiptoe to get his hand in what he believed to be the textbook optimal position, about 1/3 of the way from the shoulder to the waist. Madame Pomfrey kept studying him. "A bit more to the left," she said. "The hand is wrong." Flitwick tried to shift his hand. "Too far left, bring it back a bit." He adjusted again. "Still not right. At this angle it should." Flitwick's face flushed beet red from the effort. For anyone else, it was a trivial motion. For the tiny professor, it meant balancing on tiptoe while trying to make a precise, controlled movement. It looked like torture. But Pomfrey refused to compromise. She insisted they follow the textbook posture to the letter. Flitwick breathed deeply and tried again, his discomfort making the students around them snicker. Lynn laughed too, until something else caught his eye. Hagrid was on the dance floor with Madame Maxime. Lynn blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. Yes, Hagrid, face to face with Madame Maxime. Courageous he was, but dancing was another matter entirely. On Hagrid's very first step, his enormous boot landed on Madame Maxime's foot. Her brows twitched. Hagrid's face went a deep crimson. He apologized breathlessly, but on the next step he trod on her other foot. Her frown deepened and sweat beaded on Hagrid's forehead. He tried to remember McGonagall's footwork, but the rhythm he knew didn't seem to govern where his feet were actually landing. Step 3. Thud. Another stomp, heavier this time, and Madame Maxime wavered. Hagrid panicked, scrambled to adjust, and then, step 4, 5, 6, more stomps. Lynn watched from the side and counted, his grin widening into disbelief. 7 seconds. 6 stomps. A perfectly executed disaster, perhaps even eclipsing his own worst foot-in-mouth memories. Madame Maxime said nothing aloud. She simply tightened her expression, breathed slowly, and kept guiding Hagrid through the moves. Hagrid kept his head down, face still burning, moving mechanically as he tried to salvage the dance. Nearby students stole glances, some covering their mouths to suppress giggles, others nudging friends and smirking. No one laughed outright, though. Hagrid had earned everyone's respect, and Madame Maxime was still very much present. Lynn watched for a while longer, then looked away. Fleur beside him had noticed the commotion as well. The corner of her mouth twitched into a faint smile. "What?" Lynn asked. "You find it amusing?" Fleur considered and then nodded. "Livelier than I expected." Lynn shrugged and let himself be led back onto the floor. The music played on, the lights continued to swirl, and the enchanted snowflakes kept falling. Hagrid was still apologizing with every heavy step. William was still inadvertently stomping on his partner's toes. The Durmstrang champions steamed and sneezed through their turns, and Professor Flitwick remained bravely on his tiptoes. Lynn thought, with no small amount of admiration, that the women on the floor had a patience few others could match. Chapter 259. Remembering the Mistakes. The Hogwarts Yule Ball had been like a beautiful dream no one wanted to wake from. Swirling skirts, flickering lights, falling enchanted snowflakes, and intoxicating waltzes. Everything was so lovely it felt unreal. Many wished time would slow, even if only a little. Some, however, wanted only to disappear, those who had stepped on their partner's feet, for example. When the final note faded, the great hall erupted in thunderous applause. The weird sisters waved to the crowd before vanishing in a puff of colorful smoke. Albus Dumbledore rose and smiled. "I wish you all a Merry Christmas. Good night." The Yule Ball was over. Students drifted from the hall back to their common rooms in small groups, but the afterglow remained. Couples were suddenly everywhere, in the corridors, the library by the Black Lake, and near the greenhouses. In the corners of common rooms, tables originally used for Fall 11 were now full of whispering pairs. How long it would last, nobody could say. Professor McGonagall was already thinking about whether the school rules would need revision. In the Hufflepuff common room, the fire burned bright, orange-red flames warming the space. A few students slouched on sofas, lazily chatting. Down the corridor that led to the dormitories, at the very end, was Lynn's room. A figure stood at the door, Cedric Diggory, holding a bulging bag and hesitating at the threshold. He glanced at the bag, then at the closed door, then at the ceiling, wrestling with himself. After a long breath, he decided, this far, might as well knock. He raised his hand. Thud! A muffled noise, then a sharp ouch came from just inside. Someone clutched his forehead and staggered backward. Cedric jumped, nearly swinging out of surprise. Then he recognized Edgar, who was rubbing his head and looking pleasantly surprised. "Cedric, how did you know I was coming to find you?" Edgar asked. Cedric blinked. Apparently Edgar had thought Cedric was waiting for him. "No," Cedric waved awkwardly. "I'm not here for you." Edgar kept clutching his forehead for a moment, confused. "Huh? I'm here for Lynn." Edgar lowered his hand and cleared his throat. "Oh, Lynn's inside." Cedric was about to speak when Lynn appeared in the doorway, holding a book he'd been engrossed in. He wore a lounging robe, and his hair was a little messy, unconcerned with appearances. He raised an eyebrow. "Cedric, what's up?" Cedric forced an embarrassed smile. "Sorry to interrupt your reading. I had no choice but to come to you." Lynn glanced at the book, Nicklefmal's Gossip Notes, closed it, and set it aside casually. "No problem. Housemates can interrupt. So what is it?" Cedric stopped hiding. He carried the large bag into the room and dumped it on the desk. Edgar slipped in behind him, curious. William Smith sat up and adjusted his glasses. Ollie Thorne paused whatever he'd been doing and turned to watch. Clatter, glittering golden fragments spilled from the cloth bag, scattering across the desk and catching the light. Lynn's eyes widened. He leaned over, picked up one of the pieces, and examined it. Golden, curved, smooth on one side, jagged on the other. Lynn looked up sharply. "These aren't your 215s, are they?" Cedric managed an awkward smile and nodded. Lynn stared at the pile, then back at Cedric. "What did you?" He chose his words carefully. "Do to these?" Cedric flushed. He stood by the desk, ashamed, while Edgar sifted through the fragments making little tutting noises. "Well," Cedric cleared his throat, trying to sound less guilty. "Ludo Bagman said they should only be opened under special circumstances. We thought we'd research what counts as a special circumstance." Lynn gestured for him to continue. "You said there was a seam?" "We thought the seam meant our method of opening it was wrong." Cedric tried to explain. "We prepared, found a quiet spot, and tested a bunch of methods. First, we tried with our 23's, no reaction. We used several opening charms, still nothing. We thought maybe it was alchemical." "That part's true," Lynn said, "but it's not supposed to break like this." "Wait, let me finish." Cedric pressed on. "We went to the library and found records about similar alchemical objects. Some need a specific frequency to activate. We tried adjusting our 21 output to find that frequency. And we tried a lot, but nothing worked. Finally, Harry suggested we just pry it open. We used our 23s together to apply force along the seam." Lynn's eyelid twitched. "Some people never learned. You pried it open." Cedric gave a bitter smile. "We were prepared. We pried it open and started studying the inside. It was complicated and clever. We thought we could figure it out." "And," Lynn prompted. Cedric's face went red. "And then it ended up like this." He indicated the pile of glittering shards. Lynn was momentarily speechless. An image came to mind. A careful thief staking out a house, waiting until nobody's home, picking the lock, moving silently, grabbing the valuables and leaving undetected. That was the professional way. What they had done was the opposite. They had observed and prepared, but then chosen to attack the thing with a sledgehammer. Actually, to smash the door, ransack the place, and then, for good measure, start dismantling the toilets while they were at it. When the police arrived and saw the mess, they would look at the wreckage and ask innocently, "How did it turn out like this?" Cedric's guilt deepened. "We didn't mean to." "I know you didn't mean to," Lynn said, "but you used the wrong method." He picked up a fragment and weighed it in his hand. "This is an official Triwizard Tournament prop. Its purpose is to give champions clues for the second task. How do you think the designers expected champions to handle it?" Cedric blinked. Lynn continued, "Bagman said it should only be opened under special circumstances. That phrase means there's a specific way to open it. You need to find that way, not force it open." He set the fragment down. Noticing the seam was right, but the seam wasn't an invitation to pry it apart. It was there to show that it could be opened. The next step was to study precisely how to open it. "Didn't I help you eliminate one wrong method before?" Cedric could only whisper in his defense, his face still flushed. "We looked up information." "That was the right first step," Lynn said. "But after you looked things up, what did you do? Adjusting this 21 frequency was logical. When that didn't work, you gave up and used brute force. It's like studying a locked chest. You observe the keyhole, try different picking methods, find none work. What do you do then?" "I should," Cedric hesitated. "Think of another way." Lynn nodded and pointed at the fragments. "Instead, you chose explosives to blow the chest open." Edgar and the others could no longer hold back and started to stifle their laughter, shoulders shaking. Cedric wanted to crawl into a hole. Lynn's tone softened as he steered the conversation back. "So, you came to me to fix them?" Cedric nodded vigorously. "We'll pay. We won't make you do it for nothing." "What are you talking about? Payment? We're friends. Don't be shy." Lynn's expression shifted. "How many galleons?" Cedric had no answer. After the door closed and the conversation ended, the dormitory was quiet for a few seconds. Then Edgar burst out laughing. "Blowing open the treasure chest." He doubled over, unable to stop. "Lynn, that analogy was perfect." Lynn glanced at him. "What are you laughing at? If you'd been there, you probably would have blown it up even sooner." Edgar's laughter cut off abruptly. Chapter 260, Win-Win. A few nights later, the corridors of Hogwarts were quiet, the torches along the walls crackling softly. 3 figures moved down the hallway on tiptoe, faces alight with excitement. Cedric led the way, Roger Davies beside him, and Harry Potter brought up the rear, glancing back every few steps as if worried someone might be following them. They stopped outside Lynn's dormitory door. Cedric took a breath and knocked. "Knock! Knock, knock! Come in!" a voice called. The door opened and the 3 slipped inside. The dormitory was brightly lit. Lynn sat at his desk with a book. Today it was Grindelwald's Insights on Fiendfire. Edgar was slumped on the sofa, William was organizing notes, and Ollie stood by the window, silent as ever. But none of them looked at their roommates. All eyes went to the desk, where 2 Sivens sat quietly, gleaming gold and perfectly intact. Harry's eyes widened. The expression on his face was unmistakable. "Lynn," he blurted, "I didn't expect you actually fixed the 7s." Lynn set his book down and smiled smugly. He crossed his legs and leaned back, as if daring them to shower him with praise. "Just these 2?" he said, waving a hand. "Fixing a couple of 7s is nothing." Cedric nodded earnestly. "You're brilliant," he said. "We studied them forever and only made a mess of it. You fixed them in a few days." Lynn's smile broadened. Cedric stepped forward and set a wooden box on the desk. Click. Some mechanism triggered, and the box began to unfold itself. The lid opened, the sides extended, and in moments the ordinary box had transformed into a huge dining table. It was piled high with food: roasted lamb chops, honey-glazed ham, roast chicken, Yorkshire pudding, cream of mushroom soup, fruit tarts, chocolate cake. Well over a dozen steaming dishes that filled the room with irresistible aromas. Lynn's gaze snapped to the spread, and he involuntarily swallowed. Edgar laughed at the sight. Lynn pretended not to notice and turned to Cedric. "All this?" He pointed at the feast, then at Cedric. "What's it for?" Roger stepped forward and pulled a small, bulging cloth bag from his pocket, pressing it into Lynn's hand. The bag was heavy, The coins inside clinked. You did us a huge favor, Roger said with a smile. We owe you. Treating you to a meal is the least we can do. Lynn looked from the galleons to the food and back again. His face rarely showed embarrassment, but he gave a little sigh. He took the bag and slipped it into his pocket with a movement as smooth as water. Since you're here, he said, let's eat. Then, as if an afterthought, he added, there was no need for the galleons, though. Cedric and the others exchanged looks that plainly said, you sure pocketed those fast enough. Lynn feigned not to notice and began shepherding everyone to their seats. Come on, don't just stand there. Eat. Edgar, stop flopping about and help set the chairs. William, put the notes aside for now. You can read them after dinner. Ollie. Ollie had already slid into a chair without a word. Lynn nodded in satisfaction. Soon the group was gathered around the table and feasting. When they had eaten their fill, most of the platters had been cleared, leaving only a few scraps and empty plates. Several of them leaned back and patted their stomachs in contentment. Cedric rose, crossed to the desk, and carefully gathered the 2 sevens. He examined them closely, confirmed they were intact, and let out a long, relieved breath. Lynn, he said earnestly, thank you. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have known what to do. Roger stood and nodded. If you ever need anything, just ask. Harry hovered nearby with a mixture of guilt and gratitude. Lynn waved them away in a light tone. All right, don't make a fuss. Get back quickly and watch out. Don't get caught by the 8s. After a few more polite words, the 3 left with the 7s. The door shut, and the dormitory fell silent for a moment. Lynn produced the cloth bag from his pocket and weighed it in his hand, grinning like a man who just won the lottery. Edgar glanced at him and couldn't hold his tongue. Was that really necessary? He said, a hint of scorn in his voice. How much does your shop make in a month? How much could that bag even be worth? Lynn waved a hand. His smile didn't fade. You don't understand, Edgar, he said, with the weary air of someone worldly. Things you get for free feel different from money you earned. Edgar blinked, clearly confused. What do you mean? Lynn didn't answer. He just turned the bag over in his hand and smiled wider. William pushed his glasses up and studied Lynn thoughtfully. Ollie, quiet as ever, watched him, and something like a realization passed over his face. He was silent for a second, then spoke, quiet but clear. You didn't fix them, did you? Lynn paused, the motion of weighing the galleons stopping midair. He turned to Ollie and the corners of his mouth lifted. Exactly. Edgar stared, dumbfounded. What? Lynn rose and stretched. Having all those 7s is useless to me, he said. They just take up space. Better to trade them for galleons. Edgar's mouth dropped open. You didn't fix them? You gave them the unfixed 7s? And you took their galleons and their meal? And... He couldn't finish. Lynn patted him on the shoulder. Edgar, he said in mock solemnity, you need to learn to see beyond the surface. Edgar glared. See beyond the surface? The surface is that you lied to them. Lynn shook his head. Lied? How is it lying? They think the eggs are fixed, and so to them, the eggs are fixed. They left happy, and I accepted payment happily. It's called a win-win. Edgar fell silent. He struggled on, voice tight. So, you gave them your own 7s in exchange for a meal and a bag of galleons? Lynn considered, then corrected him with a pleased grin. And their gratitude. Edgar jabbed a trembling finger at him. You, Lynn looked innocently offended. You flatter me, he said lightly, waving his hand as if accepting a compliment.